The sun shone brightly over the capital, filling it with golden rays in the center of the city. On a high hill stood the residence of the Marquis Margon, a majestic building with exquisite architecture and well-kept gardens. The heroine's pink hair, shimmering in the sun, resembled delicate rose petals, and her light dress made of fine silk flowed over her body like a waterfall. She looked with a smile at the young man who stood in front of her, slightly embarrassed. The heroine sat opposite the young man, saying that she was not going to have a lavish wedding and wanted to live in the north. The young man warned the lady in advance that she would not have much time to relax in luxury because she had to be a responsible housewife. Frowning, the young gentleman suggested that his wife had no intention of becoming a housewife. But the heroine was only thinking about how much she needed to buy to celebrate the event at the highest level. It was as if she had not heard the words that her future husband was going to make a real housewife out of her, because that was not her role at all. It is not for nothing that they say that the lady is the queen of social life, with smooth hair and clear skin, and it is not surprising that the crown prince quickly fell in love with her. A few days ago, a funny incident occurred in the ballroom of the imperial palace, and one of the high-ranking young men decided to listen to the opinion of a socialite lady and shaved his head bald. The crown prince understood that one could not fully believe the rumors, but perhaps some of them were still true. Outwardly, the girl was quite suitable for the role of an ideal socialite, and the prince was extremely captivated by her beauty. After discussing important details, the heroine admitted that she agreed to marry the prince. Considering this a wise decision, the young man stated that people could not refuse anyway because of the contract. The prince was completely confident of his victory, but suddenly the heroine asked who told him that she was going to marry him. And what was his surprise when the lady said that she was going to marry not him at all, but his great father. This story began too long ago, and it all happened approximately 300 years ago. One day, the hero's ancestors decided to make a contract. If any of them ever had descendants, they would definitely be engaged. It was just a joke promise from the old people, but the problem was in the paper itself on which the contract was signed. It was magic paper, and even if you burn it in your head or throw it into the deepest sea, she still returned back to her place, and no one could destroy the contract because it made no sense. The prince told the lady about an important point, because if the contract was violated, a terrible misfortune would befall the family. The originally timid heroine would have succumbed to Gilbert's pressure and would have agreed to his proposal of marriage, but the modern world's Mrs. Kim was completely different. Because she already knew how this story would end, and long ago there had been Gilbert, the eldest son, who had been stopped by the Grand Duke, but the second son, Rayhan, was alive. Rayhan had a kind heart and a talent for great magic, and he became the main character of this novel. The envious Gilbert was overcome with a sense of inferiority, and he always hated the boy because he was sure that all the glory would belong only to him. It was Gilbert who became the main villain of this novel, and he only dreamed of destroying the young man in order to take his place. Only 1 year passed before Gilbert took as his wife the daughter of a noble and honorable family. Yes, that's right, and the unfortunate woman who became the villain's wife was the heroine Maevia. Her family was on the verge of bankruptcy due to a series of bad investments, and the heroine could not refuse the threat of Gilbert, who decided to take advantage of the family contract. One day, while spending hellish days in the north, the heroine thought that perhaps it would have been better if she had not married at all, and if she had been born again, so as not to repeat the same fatal mistake. But this story will not be repeated again because Mrs. Kim, reincarnated in the body, saved the dying clan, and so much so that the rooms were filled with gold and silver. And now in front of the prince sat not the timid and sweet Maevia, but a lady who could defend her opinion. Having heard that the girl was going to marry his father, the young man was outraged that she was allowing herself to do this, and how he had managed to annoy her so much. Maevia made a surprised face and asked what was wrong, since she was just trying to fulfill the terms of the contract. The lady smiled and replied that she was genuinely interested in his father as he had raised such a wonderful man and she would very much like to meet him. And most importantly, his father was still single, and Maevia was sure that it was with him that the contract should be concluded. She asked the prince to look at one point where it was stated that there was no limitation on age, social status, or other factors. Although the prince carefully looked through the entire contract, he did not notice that there was actually something like that there. Not understanding what this woman wanted to get, the young man became indignant because everyone in the empire knows that the Grand Duke is an old man. The prince asked what she wanted, dresses or jewels, and how greedy she had to be to not be satisfied with the title of Grand Duchess. The prince also assumed that the lady was probably behaving this way because of his origin, and that alone was a significant reason. Manhwa had no intention of tolerating the young man's rude behavior and asked the maid to take Sir Gilbert away, even though he had not yet finished his speech. At parting, she asked him to convey her greetings to the Grand Duke, calling the prince his dear son. The prince was extremely outraged by the behavior of the young lady, and he did not understand at all why the lady decided to behave this way. The Grand Duchy of Kalaki, located in the north, was known for its harsh winters and majestic landscapes. The snake, with scales shimmering with all shades of emerald and malachite, slowly wrapped itself around the lion, and its movements were graceful and careful. The snake crawled up to its master and asked in a human voice how long he was going to sleep. Edis Kalakis was the lord of the northern lands, and everyone knew him as a serious and irresponsible lazy person. But even compared to Gilbert, this devil-like man was much better for the heroine. About 10 days ago, a young man came to the heroine's palace on the orders of Mr. Gilbert. 7 days ago he came again, and all this time he was asking if Lady Manhwa could appear today. Then the young man came again and with tears in his eyes asked the lady to meet Gilbert at least today. Every day he hoped that the lady would agree to meet with the prince, but she refused, and the young man understood that he would hardly be able to fulfill the assignment. Mrs. Manhwa sat at her desk in her cozy office, enjoying her morning dessert, each piece a true work of art, bright strawberries and raspberries harmoniously combined with a light vanilla flavor. Manhwa cut off a small piece and, closing her eyes, enjoyed every moment, but at that moment the maid ran into the office. Sarah said that Mr. Gilbert had sent a gift, and didn't the lady want to know what it meant? As it turned out, the gentleman sent the lady a basket of chrysanthemums, which Sarah called mourning, declaring that the young man's rudeness had no limits. Looking at the basket of white flowers, Manhwa thought that he probably didn't do it on purpose. Surely white light looks nice, and that is why he decided to send white flowers, because the young man was one of those who consider all flowers to be the same. But Sarah was outraged and angrily declared that in the house of the Grand Duke, they do not teach even basic norms and manners. Gilbert had a terrible temper, and the lady knew it very well, but instead of sitting down, this morning she suggested to Sarah that they go out somewhere and have some fun, and their main goal was not to return to the palace until they spent all the money. Mrs. Manhwa always bought her clothes in the most expensive salons of the empire, and when she arrived, the employees were busy only with her, and closed the store for everyone else. After all, it was a great honor for them to serve Lady Manhwa herself, who was the eldest daughter of a famous Honorable Morgan family. In one of the fashionable salons, the lady gathered her lady friends, and the employees were incredibly happy that they were visited by a respectable lady of the empire. The aristocrats were incredibly happy that Mrs. Manhwa invited them to the fashion salon to choose their outfits. The third Marquis's daughter, Charlie, admitted that she was just thinking about what to wear for Monica's birthday. In response, Manhwa smiled and stated that she was incredibly grateful to the girls who agreed to join her today. One of the nobles felt terrible remembering her last birthday, but now she could calm down, and Manhwa invited her to choose a dress with her. Once at a social reception, a lady tried to disgrace an aristocrat who did not like her dress at all. This time, Manhwa asked Charlie not to worry, promising that Monica would pick out an outfit that the lady wouldn't even be able to squeak. At the same time, a respectable lady drove up to the salon, but the employee told her about a client who had come here earlier and booked the salon, but the lady was sure that she could come at any time. The lady was outraged, since before she could come at any time, and the doors of the salon were always open for her. The employee assured that there were already visitors inside, but the lady was sure that everything was in perfect order, and judging by her voice, her friend was in the salon. The lady with the long red hair was the eldest daughter of the third Marquis Elaine, named Monica, and she declared that the person in the salon was definitely her friend. Monica resolutely entered the salon, although the employees did not let her in, and seeing her, Manhwa asked if something was wrong. When she saw Charlie, she burst out laughing and declared that no matter how much a lady spent on a dress, without a sense of style, it would be worse than a rag worth 1 silver coin. Charlie replied that the lady had agreed to help her with her choice, and perhaps Monica should not forget her nose where she was not asked. But the self-confident lady sat down between the two aristocrats and, taking a book of dresses in her hands, declared that since this was the case, she would help Charlie choose a decent dress. Looking at the lady, Charlie admitted that she didn't need Monica's help at all, but she was sure that her excellent taste was not to be doubted at all. She called Manhwa too beautiful, so the lady would look good even in a sack of wheat, and asked Charlie to trust his taste. Although Monica was described as a villain in the novel, she is actually quite nice. She just doesn't know how to be honest with other people. And shortly after the transformation, due to the fact that the heroine became Manhwa, she probably changed the course of the novel and the characters of the main characters. Monica looked through the catalog and settled on a gorgeous dress, but insisted that bright, feminine outfits would suit Charlie's faded appearance best. Charlie found these dresses a bit pretentious and said they did not suit her taste or style at all. Holding the catalog in her hands, Monica angrily declared that Charlie should just try on some of the dresses first and then draw conclusions about them. Lady Manhwa decided to intervene in the conversation, and touching a lock of Monica's luxurious hair, she invited her to try on the dress that she had offered Charlie. The lady thought that this dress would go well with Monica's bright hair color, and probably should. Monica didn't particularly like this style, but if Mrs. Manhwa insisted, she agreed to try it on. Manhwa looked like a sweet lady who tried to cope with Monica's capricious character, and the aristocrats even jokingly called it training. Monica deliberately suggested inappropriate outfits to Charlie, while Manhwa was sure that the elegant shades from the catalog would suit the girls. While Manhwa was asking Charlie to try on a suitable dress, Monica realized that it seemed like the rumors were true. Many heard that Sir Gilbert proposed to the girl, and Monica asked if the lady had refused him, and probably she decided to show herself from a good side. Everyone knew that Gilbert was the son of a Grand Duke, but no one knew whether Monica had just told the truth. The lady laughed and told how she had to decline the great lord's offer, as expected. Although Gilbert looked noble, Monica knew he was an adopted son, and she found it funny to see him trying to act like a real aristocrat of noble birth. Charlie noticed that Monica was acting too brazenly, and her expression was being denigrated through other people. After Charlie's words, the lady became indignant because she was sure that Manhwa deserved more, and if she got married, she would have to go to that barren north. But after listening to Mrs. Monica's opinion, the heroine asked her not to worry because she had the right to decide her own fate. The heroine Manhwa was no longer that insecure and weak lady, and now she was ready to stand up to even the famous Monica. Because now she was going to live very happily in a cozy server where her husband looked only at her. The lady said that she was not feeling well and therefore decided to go and try on the outfits first. But the heroine's soul was tormented by the fact that in the end everything would repeat itself again, no matter how much effort she put in. In the original novel, Monica said nasty things about Gilbert every day, considering him the most terrible person. Slander began to be considered the heroine's words, and as soon as she accidentally nodded, everything ended in a beating. But one day this was not enough, and Monica decided to climb into his bed. It would have been better for both the heroine and Monica to never have met such a scumbag like him, and that is why Manhwa tried to change her fate. Manhwa calmly went to try on her new dress, but suddenly she heard a familiar voice behind her. It was Prince Gilbert who decided to visit the fashionable salon, and he probably really wanted to meet the lady whom he considered his future wife. She sighed, knowing that Prince Gilbert had come again, and despite all her attempts to avoid meeting him, he would not leave her alone. Manhwa felt irritation boiling inside her. She didn't want to meet the prince, and their conversations always ended in misunderstanding. Her heart was drawn to freedom and independence, and Gilbert, though a noble man, represented everything she wanted to get away from. Lady Manhwa felt a surge of anger and disappointment, and her heart had long been determined to go her own way. All this time the lady had been lying to the gentleman that she had a high temperature, and now she confessed that if she couldn't buy a new dress, the illness would definitely get worse, and since there was no medicine, what else could she do but go shopping? The young man only laughed in response, and the heroine thought he had gone completely crazy, although he had never been normal from the very beginning. He was sure that Manhwa just wanted to see him angry, and that was why she was acting like that. He still couldn't believe that she was going to marry his father and that she was really saying it, but now the prince grabbed the lady by the hand and asked her not to go too far with her pathetic antics. The prince declared that his patience had run out and he was no longer going to tolerate her impudent behavior. As soon as the heroine lost her vigilance, the prince immediately showed his true face. At that moment, Charlie ran out to help her friend with another aristocrat and shouted to the prince that the lady had clearly made it clear that she did not like him at all. In fact, the young man came to talk to the lady, who, in his opinion, had broken an important promise she had once made. So he asked Charlie in a quiet and polite voice to leave the place for a while so that he could talk calmly with his future wife. But Charlie was not going to back down and said that if the young man did not stop behaving like this, she would have to call security. The aristocrat stood opposite the gentleman and did not allow him to talk to the heroine, and he was extremely angry that everything turned out this way. The young man had already felt contemptuous glances on himself before, and now Charlie was looking at him exactly like that. His young acquaintances also looked at the prince, and one day declared that he should never dare to come with his nonsense again. The boys screamed that Charlie was looking at him as if he were some kind of insect, so he angrily declared that the fly had no right to look at him like that. It all happened near the doors of a fashionable salon, and local residents had already crowded behind Gilbert, while he shouted that he would be the one who would rule the North. Manhwa answered seriously that if the young man did not want to be arrested, he had better leave and never show up again. There were already a lot of people gathered nearby, and the young man realized that the situation was becoming tense and he could be accused of stalking. At the most opportune moment, a carriage drove up, and the maid Sarah appeared from it, informing her mistress of her arrival. Charlie pushed the lady closer to the carriage so that she would go away from the angry gentleman who continued to shower her with close attention. Manhwa smiled at the young man and informed him that she was going to leave, and thanked Charlie for the pleasant meeting. The prince did not expect that the lady could just up and leave, and he still hoped for a conversation, but the lady was already sitting in the carriage. He was going to come for her on the day of the imperial ball, and informed the lady about this through the window. But Manhwa confidently stated that she had not expressed herself sufficiently, since she had long ago informed the gentleman that she was not going to go to the ball, and she happily suggested that their next date be right at the engagement party. Some time after the lady had gone north, it became fashionable to politely decline offers of partnership. They say that sometimes, to show that you don't want to meet anymore, they even started burning the flowers that were given to you, and this became a certain tradition among ladies. In the evening, the lady lay down to rest on a cozy sofa, because she had a very difficult day, and Sarah was sure that the lady should be careful in the near future. She brought a glass of water for her mistress so that she could feel better, because Sarah knew that Manhwa was simply tired of Prince Gilbert. The whole evening, the lady pondered how the gentleman managed to find out that she was in a fashionable salon, since her trip had not even been planned in advance. Sarah also could not understand how the master managed to find Manhwa, and whether he dared to introduce an observer for her. But the heroine was sure that if it had been one of her people, she would have immediately suspected something was wrong. Sarah was worried that she was not there, and warned the lady to only go out with security next time. But it was not that simple. She told the maid that there might be problems here. Although Gilbert does not look like a worthy knight, he is considered the best of all the comrades there in the entire empire. So a couple of guards could stop him, and the maid didn't even imagine that the situation was so serious. The heroine assured them that everything would be fine, because in the worst case they had something they could use, and the lady even promised that she would do it only once. The next moment the ladies screamed in surprise because a strange sound was heard near the window, and the curtains flew in different directions. Sarah suggested that they might be attacked by a magical creature and asked the lady to call the knights immediately. At that moment, a small black raven flew into the window with a loud crack, flew across the room and landed on the hand of the lady, who looked at the raven with surprise and admiration. The bird seemed unusual, its eyes sparkled with intelligence and cunning, and after carefully examining the bird, the lady realized that a real crow had flown to her. The raven looked at both of them and let out a sharp cry that echoed throughout the room. The heroine was sure that this was not an ordinary bird at all, but it could not be called a magical creature, and she knew very well who had just flown to her. The black bird was the familiar of His Grace the Duke, and Manhwa knew it for sure. One of the usual gloomy evenings, the ruler of the North received an unexpected letter, and he was very surprised to read the strange message. He had never thought that Lady Mevia might view their relationship in such a light, and he knew her to be an intelligent and independent woman, but he had never imagined that she might be interested in marriage. That is why the young man sent the little raven to find out what was really going on. He ordered the bird to fly out and find out what Gilbert was up to, and also asked it to find out about another girl. The blackbird flew to Lady Mevia, and thus the ruler of the North was going to follow her. Who would have thought that among the Duke's familiars there was such a cute, magical creature? At this time in the capital, at the estate of Duke Calachis, everything was not so calm after the recent conversation with the lady. Broken bottles of alcohol were scattered around the prince, and the young man himself sat in the middle of a dark room and could not understand who this girl thought she was to look at him with such a look. The young man was confident that in the future he would occupy a high position and become the most famous and respected ruler of the empire. The prince was set to become the future head of House Calachis, and he could not believe that Lady Mevia would dare to reject him. At the moment when the young man was experiencing great suffering, a black raven came to follow him, and he understood what goals the master was pursuing. The enraged prince could not find a place for himself, but at that moment his assistant came in and brought what he asked for. He grabbed the tray with his hand and was sure that from that moment on, everything would be over with Mevia. There was a small note on the tray, and the prince was already prepared with a cunning plan to get even with the girl who dared to refuse him. All night long, Raven tried to find out the necessary information for the master, and after a sleepless night, the black raven settled comfortably on a soft pillow and fell asleep. The raven was sleeping, spreading his wings, and even despite the lady's voice, he still did not wake up. The lady approached the raven sleeping on the pillow and said that it was time for Raven to get up, and only after that did the bird open its eyes. It was clear from Mevia's enthusiastic mood that she was about to go somewhere. Something interesting was about to happen soon, because the heroine had been preparing for this day for so long, studying that guy to the very core. She knew him much better than he knew himself now, and the lady wanted with all her heart to use Mr. Gilbert to finally put him in his place. She was going to swallow everything, fate and all, and press on the most vulnerable spots of this insidious man. In the afternoon she equipped her horse, and the maid Sarah was worried that it would be difficult for the lady to cope alone, but Mevia had already thought of everything. She was sure that nothing terrible would happen, and Alice's horse would not be harmed either. Sarah asked to take at least one bodyguard with her, but the heroine flatly refused protection. Because she knew that she couldn't handle this man with just a couple of guards, and if someone else showed up, he would immediately become wary, and she wanted to definitely end this story this time. Raven flew up to the heroine because he was probably also worried about her, but Mine replied that everything would be fine, and Raven could rest easy. She sternly ordered Raven not to follow her under any circumstances, noticing that the bird continued to fly nearby. Lady Mevia saddled her favorite horse, Alice, knowing that her mission was important and she could not afford to delay. The horse rushed forward, easily overcoming the forest paths. Their gallop sounded like music, the rhythmic beats of their hooves on the ground merging with the whisper of the wind in the treetops. Suddenly, the silence of the forest was broken by the whistle of a forged sword, and she stopped Alice abruptly. Prince Gilbert stood before her, holding a sword in his hands, his face focused and his eyes sparkling with determination. Lady Mevia froze in surprise, not expecting to meet him here deep in the forest. Seeing the girl's surprise, the young man admitted that he just wanted to say hello and asked her not to look so warily in his direction. In response to his speech, the heroine stated that she did not expect an apology at all and asked the gentleman to answer from the road. The prince seemed not to hear the lady's words and only noticed her excellent posture and asked if she had taken riding lessons. The lady was indignant. Did the young man really stop her on the road just for the sake of the nonsense he had just asked? She felt the tension in the air ease a little, but she still remained wary. Gilbert confidently stated that he was going to give the lady another chance to accept his proposal and go to the ball with him, and his father will never allow Gilbert to marry the well-known Mevia. But the thing was that his father had a completely different opinion about his son's wedding. He treated people like animals and used them as tools solely for his own purposes and benefits. Now he did not need a bride from another family who could lay claim to the family's material benefits. And even if he allows the marriage to take place, he will still throw away an innocent lady and will never protect her from the wolves. The heroine considered his father to be much more merciful than the gentleman had just described. Despite the fact that the young prince lagged behind his younger brother and always did what he wanted, he was considered a man who would only ruin the reputation of the family and who would never become a great ruler. Mavia loudly declared that there was not the slightest attraction in Gilbert, and that was why she was not interested in him at all. She didn't want to hide her opinion from the impudent Gilbert any longer, and she would only be glad if he finally left her alone. After these words, the heroine thought that Gilbert would finally understand everything and wished the young man a good ball. Looking after the lady who was leaving on her horse, the young man angrily whispered that she had just missed her last chance, and he really wanted to make the girl regret it for the rest of her days, because he was sure that he was her only destiny. Grabbing his sword, Gilbert became completely angry because the lady had just dared to humiliate him again. He ran after the horse, shouting that he would do this, and Mavia would not be able to go to any lengths. Lady Mavia, confidently dismounting from her horse, landed on the ground with an ease that would have surprised anyone. She somersaulted like a true knight and stood up on her feet, ready for action. Prince Gilbert, who was standing at a distance, raised his eyebrows in surprise. He did not expect to see such a reaction from Lady Mavia. His sword was still in his hands, but he did not intend to attack. But she was already too close. With every step, her confidence only grew. She knew that she had to show him that she would not tolerate his arrogance, and with one blow she knocked the sword out of the prince's hands. The sword flew far to the side, and standing on one leg on the horse, the heroine said that at first she tried to speak politely with the prince. Lady Mavia stood before Prince Gilbert, her eyes flashing with anger, unable to contain her emotions, and declared that she was not afraid of Gilbert, whose face turned pale from the unexpected words. The heroine's story began about 11 years ago, when she was still a very little girl. One day, on a busy street, a man approached her and told her that he would soon die. Then the little heroine thought that the devil was standing in front of her, hiding under the identity of an old man, and it was not without reason that he came to her and offered her a deal. It was a form of evil that was never mentioned in the novel, and the devil claimed that he could give the girl great power that no one could ever defeat. Although the little heroine's entire body was frozen with horror, she instinctively understood that she could die if she refused the devil himself. So the girl grabbed the man by the robe and promised that she was ready to make any grave for him. The devil always carried with him a box with vials containing his blood, and he ordered the girl to drink it whenever she needed strength. The devil's blood also had some side effects, and the heroine would only be able to borrow the devil's power for a short time. The little girl was embarrassed by the sight of real blood, but the devil promised to make strawberry-flavored blood especially for her, and for the devil, this man was kind enough. The heroine became a grown-up girl, and with each year her self-confidence only grew, and everyone considered her a real witch. Gilbert realized that Mavia had made a contract with the devil himself, and he didn't know that his words were not a joke at all. The prince called the girl a vile coward and ordered her to return so that he could report everything to the imperial family. After his words, Mavia laughed even harder, and the young man was about to report that a weak lady had attacked him in the forest, and probably no one would believe him. And even if he were an emperor, he would definitely believe a weak lady, and the heroine decided to take advantage of this. Prince Gilbert gritted his teeth as he watched Lady Mavia's antics, her anger and stubbornness beginning to irritate him. But for some unknown reason, the prince felt a power from her that was similar to his father's, and most likely even more powerful than his. All this time, Raven watched the heroine and transmitted information through a magic ring that could show an image. And Raven wasn't the only one watching her, and right now the ruler of the North was looking at her calm face. Looking at the girl's behavior, the young man thought that she probably predicted his every step. While Mavia was laughing at the angry prince, at that moment Gilbert's friend named Cullen Turner rode up to them. He greeted the lady politely and told her that he was Gilbert's best friend. Approaching his friend, he asked what had happened because the prince had promised that he would simply talk to the girl, and opposite her on a horse sat this very Mavia. He laughed and asked to forgive his friend's rudeness, noting that the girl's riding position was very original. At this moment, the lady was sitting on one knee on the back of her horse, and her saddle was completely on the other side. The sun slowly enveloped the girl in a pink light, and the lady, sitting astride her horse, ordered her to move forward. All this time, Sarah was eagerly awaiting the return of her mistress, and she began to worry when she saw the lady return, who still managed to get hurt. Looking at her leg, the heroine was surprised because her shin was very swollen and red, and it was painful for her to move her leg. She even joked that it seemed that demon blood did not increase stamina, and the maid was worried, and in this situation the mistress would not be able to get to the imperial event, which she was so looking forward to. They say that not only the prince but also the emperor himself will be present at the ball, and the event was supposed to be very luxurious. The heroine admitted that she was not sad about this at all, and that she did not have a partner to go to the ball with, and Sarah promised to give the lady a compress every day. Raven's black raven finally returned and cawed loudly to get his mistress's attention. Since Raven should have seen her earlier, she knew that she looked absolutely stunning when she attacked the prince, and if the Grand Duke saw it, he would definitely fall in love with her. Raven sat on the dresser and angrily tapped his beak on the letter, which the lady probably hadn't noticed. The lady looked at the bird, which continued to peck at the envelope, and asked if the black raven wanted to eat. Sarah said that an invitation had arrived from the imperial palace, and it seemed that Raven also wanted her to go to the ball. The raven actually began to caw throughout the room, and Sarah begged the lady to go to the ball and have a good time there. When the maid realized that the mistress was not going to go to the ball, she almost cried from disappointment. She was sure that it was worth looking at Gilbert, who would probably try to look as good as possible, but the heroine admitted that the person she really wanted to see was unlikely to come to this event. In the novel, the Grand Duke came to the capital only once. Even when his second son was in danger, he did not come. And today Mavia realized that it was very difficult to interest the Grand Duke. Mavia decided that next time she should probably try to hurt herself so badly that Gilbert himself would be forced to call the Grand Duke. Early in the morning, the maid helped the heroine get ready and put on a cute dress so that she could meet her parents for a family dinner. Inside the palace, there was a cozy atmosphere. Dishes with exquisite treats were laid out on the table, and her parents were sitting around waiting for her arrival. Waiting for the heroine at the table were the Marquis and Marchioness of Morgan, who were Mavia's parents, and judging by their faces, they were not at all pleased that their daughter was late for the family dinner. The lady sat down next to her mother, who asked if everything was okay with her daughter lately. She probably felt that the girl might have some problems, and asked her if something happened to her while eating to keep it to herself, and calmly talked to her parents. After such a noise, it was not at all surprising that they could find out about the affair with Gilbert, and the heroine understood perfectly well that she could turn to her parents for help. But judging by the original novel, the parents were always indifferent to their daughter, and she only had to watch them go. When the heroine was still a very little girl on her 6th birthday, her parents paid no attention to their daughter at all. All the holidays they were busy with their own affairs, and even at Christmas they were completely absorbed in work. Knowing all the ins and outs of her family, Mavia could not understand why her parents suddenly became interested in her affairs. The father asked his daughter not to worry too much, promising that the family was able to cope even with what their child had caused. Mother told a story about when Mavia was 7 years old. She once lay down on the floor to stop them from leaving. Remembering this incident, the heroine admitted that it was impossible to forget this story at all, and laughed after her mother's words. After all, half of the family's entire fortune was at stake back then, and that day the parents were going to invest in the damned shipping company. The heroine was a child. At 7 years old, she could not convince her parents with logic, so she made a scandal, which she is even a little ashamed to remember. The parents recalled this incident with a smile because their daughter always stayed with the child for them, despite her age. Since childhood, she turned out to be too old, so they thought that the girl did not need parents. But this was not the case at all, and the parents were at their wits' end because they did not understand how to behave with a 7-year-old girl who constantly demanded their attention. Little Mavia threw tantrums and really wanted to be with her parents more often because at a young age a child needed care more than ever. Holding her daughter's hand, the mother admitted that even now she keeps everything to herself, just like in her distant childhood. The heroine wanted to change the fate of the family, but she never believed that she could change the atmosphere in the family, and now she realized how deeply mistaken she had been all this time. The parents asked if their daughter had found a partner for the ball, and the father jokingly suggested that they go together, holding hands as before. Mavia told her parents that she wasn't planning on going to the ball at all, so she didn't need a partner at all. All this time, Raven the Raven was nearby and suddenly began to fly right over the dinner table, and the daughter asked her parents for forgiveness for the nimble prankster. The father asked his daughter if she knew this bird, and she said that it was her favorite pet. The heroine's parents were very vigilant, and she was most afraid that they would realize that this raven was a magical creature. Having caught the nimble raven, the heroine assumed that he was probably just hungry and that's why he flew here, but the mother had already noticed that her daughter's tastes had changed a lot during this time. As Maivia left the dining room, she asked the raven if something had happened or if he simply wanted to convey something. The raven croaked loudly and spat out the seals of the imperial house, which were probably on the letter of invitation. The lady said that he had no partner for the ball and asked if the little black raven wanted to be her companion. Looking into the raven's sad eyes, the heroine joked that they should think about the difference in height. In her imagination, she imagined how she would dance with a little black bird at the ball, but unfortunately, if you don't know how to dance, you can't become a partner. At the same time, the Duke was informed that preparations for the procession in the capital were completely completed. The assistant stood in the ruler's office and wanted to know when he was ready to give the order to depart. Night enveloped the palace of the ruler of the north. The moon shone brightly, reflecting in the snowy expanses, and the stars twinkled like precious stones on the dark velvet of the sky, and a magical light appeared in one of the windows of the palace. The raven flew to the owner, turning into a man. His face was focused, and his eyes glowed with determination. Because the night was a time of strength and magic, when the boundaries between worlds become thinner. The heroine briefly visited her parents because she wanted to tell them something, and thanked her mother and father for inviting her to the ball. This time, Mavia wanted to allow herself to act childishly, and her parents assumed that it was about an old contract. The daughter confidently stated that she would like to fulfill the conditions of that contract, but her father and mother did not at all expect to hear such a decision. Everyone understood perfectly well that, except for Gilbert, there were only children left among the men in that house. But no one knew that there was still one unmarried person left in their family, and the heroine was going to tell her parents the whole truth about her plans. The person in question was Duke Kalakis, and he was known to everyone as a gloomy old man with gray hair. After listening to me and my daughter, my mother admitted that she understood her perfectly, but my father did not understand how a lady could give permission for this wedding. It seems that only now did the mother truly understand her daughter, but all this time she had no idea to whom the lady had given her heart. She asked if her daughter had made arrangements with the Duke, and warned that first they should make up for what they lacked in communication, and suggested arranging a family trip on the day of the ball. Mother suggested going to Elysia, but it was a country on a neighboring continent that the heroine had heard about. The heroine claimed that her mother had misunderstood her and that the Duke looked much younger than his years. But the Marquise, with a smile on her face, asked her daughter to quickly pack her things because she had decided to go on an exciting journey. Lady Mavia was preparing for the upcoming ball. The soft purple dress she had chosen for this special occasion exuded elegance and grace. Then she noticed the fan, which was her favorite accessory. It was made of fine silk with an exquisite pattern of flowers in soft purple and gold tones, just the same color as her dress. Maid Sarah noted that for a lady who didn't want to go to the ball, Mavia was very active. She even suggested that it was probably all because that same Duke was not an old man, but the lady asked Sarah to stop thinking about it. Rumors had already spread throughout the mansion, and Mavia knew that if the Duke did not show up at the ball, and if he turned out to be an old man, she would have to go to another continent. She didn't know whether the young man would appear at the ball. The heroine needed to check again, so she began to look for Raven. But the bird had not been seen since the morning, and Mavia really hoped that the raven had not flown far away. The atmosphere in the Imperial Hall was one of anticipation and excitement before a luxurious ball. Rumors had already spread among the aristocrats that the Duke's adopted son, who had arrived in the capital very handsomely, and that this young gentleman and Lady Mavia had had a love quarrel right in the middle of the street. The ladies said that the lady was taken in by the Duke's appearance, and this rumor was the most discussed among the aristocrats. Some people thought that Mavia was just a beautiful girl, while others saw her business acumen, and you also knew about the quarry that she bought for a lot of money, and which was soon closed due to the invasion of monsters. While the aristocrats were not shy about discussing Mavia out loud, a female voice came from behind them, declaring that Mavia was not at all the kind of person they could speak about so casually. Mavia's first step was to head to a long table laden with exquisite appetizers and glasses of wine, the white wine served in crystal glasses that shimmered in the light like precious diamonds. Taking a few steps away from the noisy crowd, Lady Mavia found a secluded corner of the hall where she could enjoy her drink in silence. Maevia was most interested in why the Duke had not yet shown up at the ball, and when Raven spat out the imperial seal from the letter, she realized that this was a hint at the Duke's appearance, but she was probably wrong. She turned around and saw Lady Monica, who was known not only for her beauty, but also for her sharp tongue and skill at weaving intrigues. The heroine didn't even notice that she said "Bro Duke" out loud, and Monica just happened to hear her words, and Mavia realized that the situation was not very pleasant. Mavia knew that Monica would laugh, the Duke would look like a wrinkled old man, and as soon as she imagined it, she immediately began to feel wildly stressed. But Monica came with a completely different question and wanted to know why the lady was not responding to the letter she had recently sent. Not understanding what letter was being discussed, the heroine admitted that she did not remember receiving any messages from Monica. Monica's indignation knew no bounds. She was sure that Mavia simply did not consider the letter worthy of an answer, although she expected a message from her every day. Lady Mavia held back a sigh. She knew Monica always knew how to catch her interlocutor in a weak spot, and feeling a slight irritation from her words, she still tried to remain calm. Mavia breathed a sigh of relief, knowing she had to be careful when dealing with such a woman. She asked the lady for forgiveness, saying that too many disturbing events had happened recently. The heroine decided to play up the situation, and taking the girl by the hand and smiling sweetly, she admitted that she had lost her temper, and Monica was obliged to forgive her in any case. Pushing the girl away, the lady said that it would be better for her not to do anything for which she would later have to apologize. Monica didn't want to give in to the banal compliments about her beauty, but Mavia didn't even say a word about the red-haired lady's attractive appearance. In fact, Monica did not come for empty talk. She wanted to discuss an important matter that concerned the territory that belonged to Mavia. The conversation was about the stone quarry that the heroine bought 10 years ago, which is still teeming with terrible monsters. Since Monica supported the researcher who studied these monsters, she asked if Mavia could sell her these lands. After listening to the question, Mavia admitted that it was probably impossible, but Monica was sure that this land was completely useless for the lady. She only wanted to take care of Mavia's honor, but suddenly the butler's voice was heard, announcing the arrival of Mr. Gilbert. The aristocrats and guests, dressed in their most luxurious attire, were gathered in the hall, discussing the latest news and anticipating the evening's entertainment. And as soon as the prince's arrival was announced, all the guests prepared to see him. All eyes, full of admiration and delight, were directed towards him. Gilbert was the embodiment of elegance. Tall, and his uniform, decorated with gold embroidery, emphasized his stately figure and gave him an aristocratic grandeur. However, in the midst of this sea of delight stood Lady Mavia, who watched what was happening with displeasure. She couldn't understand why everyone was going crazy about Prince Gilbert. His charm seemed superficial to her, and his manner arrogant. The aristocrats, as if enchanted, began to whisper among themselves, discussing his appearance and dreaming of attracting his attention. Mavia didn't even have time to notice how Lady Monica headed towards the prince and, smiling broadly, approached him to express her respect. But what was Mavia's surprise when she realized that Lady Monica and Gilbert knew each other, and they had definitely seen each other before. As the prince approached the ladies and began exchanging pleasantries with Monica, who was renowned for her beauty, Mavia felt a surge of irritation. Mavia tried to quickly approach the prince, and taking Lady Monica by the hand, asked him to continue their conversation about an important matter. Lady Mavia was the only woman in the room who did not succumb to his charm, and this only fueled his interest in her even more. Upon seeing her, the young man immediately paid attention to her and, in front of the aristocrats, greeted the lovely lady and said that he was glad to see her in good health. She decided to stay true to herself and her beliefs, even if it meant standing up to every other aristocrat in the room. Therefore, she was not at all embarrassed to answer the prince as she saw fit, after which the young man called her very witty, because she did not want to communicate with him at all, even despite his high title. The attention of the aristocrats was drawn only to the prince and the lady, who insisted that she had nothing at all to talk about with the young man. She was sure that Gilbert could talk about her power as much as he wanted because no one would believe him anyway. Unexpectedly, the prince declared that he would never defame the honor of a respected lady, and with these words, the prince suddenly dropped to one knee right in front of her. There was a murmur of surprise and admiration in the hall as the prince openly proposed marriage to Lady Mavia. It was hard to refuse a public offer, and the prince understood that even if the lady refused, she would still not be able to marry her father, and she would have no choice. The next second, the young man took out a precious box from his pocket, which contained an engagement ring with a luxurious pink stone. She knew that a refusal could cause a storm of discussion among the aristocrats, but she could not allow herself to give in. At that moment, she stepped forward and poured red wine directly on the prince's head. There was complete silence in the room, wine running down Gilbert's face, his eyes widening in surprise and shock. The prince slowly raised his head, seeing the bottle in Mavia's hands. Her action became a topic of discussion for many evenings to come. Lady Mavia had challenged Prince Gilbert himself, and had done so with grace and dignity. At this time, the venerable gentleman met with a man whose invitation he decided to respond to. The young man was curious about who the current king was, and judging by everything, not much time had passed since their last meeting. It all started about 15 years ago, when one day a young master became outraged that the North was ignoring the imperial orders. Only the North could control the demonic beasts, so the ruler was sure that the North should not be touched under any circumstances. He turned to the young gentleman and asked his son to listen carefully to his father, whose opinion was of the utmost importance to him. There were many rumors about the ruler of the North, and the king himself knew very well what kind of person he was. And everyone knew that the ruler of the North was not an ordinary person, like all people, and in his soul were kept many secrets connected with real magic. The aristocrats at the ball froze in anticipation of a reaction. Some suppressed laughter, some whispered words of surprise. Holding an empty wine bottle in her hands, the heroine said that she was probably mistaken in her surprise and thought that it was just a dream. The prince shouted that this was the most pathetic excuse, and he could not believe that a mature lady dared to do this in front of all high society, and asked the aristocrats to admit that the girl had acted too rudely at a formal event. But after the prince's statement, everyone realized that the wedding proposal was one-sided, and Gilbert was simply unrequitedly in love. For Mavia, it was a moment of triumph, believing that true strength lies in the ability to remain true to oneself, even under pressure. The prince was left standing in the middle of the hall with a wet head and the realization that her game was just beginning. He probably should have been more selective about who he approached, and Lady Mavia turned out to be far from a timid lady who couldn't stand up for herself. The Lavan Empire had a huge territory, and by taking away the sea trade, the king's power was suddenly shaken. After this, power passed to 3 wealthy families who were chosen as mediators to rule. These were families of titled aristocrats, and the first of them was the Marquisate of Elaine. The next family chosen to rule was the Marquisate of Morgause, which was renowned for its outstanding knights. And the last family chosen to rule the empire was the Marquisate of Margona, and it was in this family that the heroine Mavia was located. Among them, the Marquisate of Margon was a family known for its outstanding qualities, which also meant that in the event of a conflict, the likelihood of guilt lay with the opposite side. At that moment, the heroine remembered the words of her parents, who warned that if anything happened, their daughter could turn to them for protection. Observing the scandal that had occurred at the ball, a young man approached the prince and asked the lady to think about Gilbert's reputation, perfectly understanding her feelings. It was Baron Cullen, who probably wanted to stand up for Prince Gilbert in front of the aristocrats. But the heroine confidently declared that the rope that the Baron was holding onto would not save him in the future, and the young man should act wisely. This event was the most unpredictable and the most discussed at the ball, while Gilbert stood in the center of the hall, covered in wine. He stated that there was no one sane here or in the north, referring to all the aristocrats present. Despite the enraged prince, disgraced in front of high society, the heroine continued to laugh in his face. At that moment, an advisor approached the girl and said that His Majesty asked to meet with the lady personally. Surprised, the lady asked again if the young man had made a mistake, since she had not planned any meetings at all. Lady Mavia's heart beat faster. She knew that this invitation could not be simple. The lady nodded in agreement and followed the advisor. A violent storm broke out outside, rain pouring down and lightning tearing the sky apart. Maevia felt uneasy in the gloomy surroundings. Every step brought her closer to meeting the venerable gentleman, and she could not get rid of the strange feeling. The atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. The young man looked neat, but for some reason that evening his face was distinguished by being pale to the point of blueness. The heroine decided to stop and ask Mr. Advisor why His Majesty had so unexpectedly requested a meeting. The advisor was very worried and admitted to the ladies that he could only tell them one thing. According to him, the heroine had been bringing trouble upon herself all this time, and Maevia was very surprised when she heard these words. Lady Maevia felt a tremor inside her. The storm outside the window seemed to symbolize the emotions and conflicts that raged in her heart. Ignoring the advisor, she heard a familiar voice, and looking towards the gazebo in the garden, she realized that she urgently needed to find out what was going on there. Despite the advisor's persuasion, she promised to return soon and ran in the other direction. There were two people standing in the gazebo, and a lady in a white glove carefully wiped the red wine from the prince's face. The aristocrat allegedly worried that the prince was very offended by the girl's cruel act, which happened in front of everyone. This girl was Lady Monica, and the prince did not understand why the lady decided to help him in a difficult situation. He understood that the support of an aristocrat could not be ordinary, and the girl was probably pursuing her own goals. Monica insisted that she was helping the prince only because she understood his angry state perfectly well. The lady said that she didn't really like Maevia at all, but unfortunately she didn't know that the girl was standing right behind her. Monica told the prince that once she even wanted Maevia to do worse than she did, and sometimes she even wished misfortune on the girl. The heroine did not know whether to ignore the situation, because if she left, it would no longer be an inappropriate relationship, and perhaps the heroes would live happily as a harmonious couple. However, she didn't want to let Monica get away with it any longer, and decided that that was enough. Lady Maevia felt a surge of courage and determination, and this time she could not afford to remain in the shadows and listen to their conversation. Monica turned around with surprise and confusion on her face, and the cunning lady clearly did not expect to see Maevia here. In a serious voice, the heroine said that she would like to give Monica one piece of advice, the first and last. She asked the girl to stay away from the impudent gentleman, and better yet, never meet him again. The prince also turned to face her, his expression changing from surprise to tension, and he didn't know how to react to Lady Maevia's appearance at such a moment. The young man confessed that the girl should not have come here, and he suddenly ran towards the heroine. Monica looked at them both with concern, the atmosphere in the room becoming increasingly tense. And at that moment, Lady Maevia realized that the situation could become a turning point for all three of them. Gilbert's hand reached out to his girlfriend. She realized that she had let her guard down and probably shouldn't have interfered in their conversation at all. Monica started screaming loudly and asking the prince to stop, but no one knew what he decided to do next. But Maevia was calm, and perhaps it was already a predetermined end that could not be changed. She was already prepared for any outcome of events, but at that moment the prince's hand was sharply pulled away by a young man who unexpectedly appeared in the courtyard of the imperial palace. The prince begged his master to let him go, but the young man said in a frightening voice that it was time for Gilbert to go home. None of them expected to see the ruler of the north here, and a young man with pale skin, dark hair, and bright blue cold eyes appeared before them. The descriptions of the Duke throughout the story were quite strange, and it was known that the young man was strong enough to subdue ferocious monsters with ease. He hardly ever left his chambers, and very few people saw him, and those who had even once seen the Grand Duke could not open their mouths. In the long corners of the eyes, as if in the strokes of the devil's brush, there was hidden an extraordinary seductiveness, and this description from the novel is quite sufficient. The Duke's unexpected appearance made her cover her mouth with her hand, because no one expected the honorable gentleman to be here at this time. The prince pleaded that the whole situation was a complete misunderstanding, and for some reason called the Duke his father. But Gilbert had already been captured by the guards, and he was screaming for the guards to let him go, and his father was allegedly incredibly merciless only to him. Everyone knew about the Duke's reputation for being harsh and merciless towards those who did not live up to his standards of honor and dignity. All this time, the king was watching what was happening from behind the bushes, and turning to Maivia, he asked her for an important favor. It was he who arranged the meeting with the Grand Duke, and that is why the king asked the girl to tell the master that he left first. This meant that the Grand Duke had personally ordered his adjutant to call Lady Maivia, and she had only just learned of it. The king felt his heart beat faster. He knew that his actions could cause discontent among many, but he did not expect such a sharp reaction from the Duke. The ruler of the North had great power, and even the king himself was afraid of this influential man. Therefore, he quickly ran out of the bushes so as not to meet the cold gaze of the young man, whom everyone was incredibly afraid of. The butler offered to escort Lady Monica, who was very upset by everything that was happening. Suddenly, Maivia and the Duke were left alone, and the lady felt the venerable gentleman's gaze on her for the first time. Sure, the boy looked like the biggest villain, but he probably wasn't so scary that he would run away at the first meeting. And no matter how much the heroine looked at him, the only thought that was spinning in her head was that this young man was incredibly handsome. The Duke immediately asked why the girl had rejected Gilbert's proposal of marriage, since he seemed to be a suitable candidate for a husband. The Duke was not a man who liked idle talk. He immediately decided to find out why the lady decided to marry him, and he wanted to know the real reason. The heroine knew the answer to this question perfectly well, but now she needed to say something else. She couldn't tell the Duke that she knew of a future in which she had not chosen him. In the original story, immediately after the wedding, Gilbert sent the lady north, and the lady could not resist his opinion. 6 months later, he summoned the lady back to the capital with impure intentions, and then the naive Maivia was only delighted by the offer. But unfortunately, she did not know what terrible fate awaited her as soon as she returned from the north and met the prince again. The Duke was sure that Maivia did not need to go to the prince and suggested that she stay in his palace. Then he was the only one who warned the girl of both dangers, but the heroine, on the contrary, was afraid of him. In the original story, the lady did not have a strong character and only cried out of despair. That's why she tried to escape and ended up in the hands of the cruel Gilbert. She was imprisoned in a high tower where the prince mercilessly threw her. But the rulers of the North were the only people who were concerned about the lady and sympathized with her terrible fate. Until the very end, he tirelessly extended a helping hand and really did not want her to connect her fate with the prince. Then the heroine was unable to grab the Duke's hand until the very end and only moved away and was afraid of him. No one understood why the Duke decided to help a defenseless girl, but now the heroine was sure of one thing: if she had taken the Duke then, she definitely would not have faced such a terrible end. Now Maivia knew the course of the affair and was ready to change fate, so when she saw the Duke, she offered to dance together, deciding this time to definitely be with him. The Duke probably didn't even imagine that the girl would ask him to dance at the ball, and it was the first time they had seen each other in their lives. Smiling, the heroine promised to tell about herself during the dance, but of course she had no intention of telling the truth. Now she needed to attract the Duke's attention and arouse his genuine interest in her person, and Maivia was ready to do anything to radically change the course of the plot and make her fate happy. But in response to her proposal, the Duke coldly refused, and the heroine asked if it was really difficult for him to dance and if she could teach him. The young man admitted that this was a troublesome task for him, but the heroine did not understand why he continued to refuse. She was sure that the Duke would immediately agree to dance, but now an awkward silence hung over the heroes. The Duke had just declared his interest in the girl, but suddenly a feeling of laziness overcame his curiosity. In connection with this, the Duke decided to return home and informed the lady about this personally. He also considered further communication via letters too troublesome and suggested ending the correspondence there. This man turned out to be much more picky than the heroine expected, and the Duke seemed to treat everything with apathy and without much interest. Since he had already come, the heroine asked if it would be a shame to leave without enjoying the luxurious ball. Having said goodbye to his mistress, the Duke was about to leave her company, but the heroine understood that he urgently needed to be stopped. She had one last hope left, and making a sweet face, the heroine admitted that she really wanted to dance, but she didn't have a partner. It turned out that this made the young man stop, and Mevia didn't even immediately understand what she had just said. She even managed to get scared that her words were too insistent, but suddenly the Duke asked if one dance would be enough. Not believing her luck, the lady even asked again whether the Duke had really agreed to her proposal. Holding the girl's hand, the young man asked again if one dance would be enough, and looked closely at his interlocutor. Mevia was silent and could not believe that her trick actually worked, and the Duke agreed to dance. They walked out onto the dance floor, where aristocrats were whirling in a whirlwind of music and light. The hall was filled with the sounds of violins and pianos, and the bright lights of the chandeliers created a magical atmosphere. The Duke took Lady Mevia by the hand and led her to the center of the room, and as they began to dance, all eyes turned to them. Calling himself clumsy, the Duke was sure that he was not really a very good dancer, and forced himself to come because he wanted to get to know the girl better. Lady Mevia felt free and happy. At that moment, all worries about the recent events at the ball faded into the background. Since the lady knew how to dance well, she took upon herself the responsibility of directing the dance, and decided to ask if the Duke did not hate her. They danced for only a few minutes, and Mevia decided to teach the Duke to dance, and did not expect that he did not know how to move to music at all. The aristocrats watched what was happening carefully, but as soon as they felt the gaze of the ruler of the north, they immediately ran away in panic, and a little girl from the crowd even began to cry. Lady Mevia felt a little awkward under the guests' gaze, but she needed to get the Duke's attention. She didn't want the Duke to run away from the ball right now, and she was trying to think of a way to keep him. Suddenly the music stopped playing, but the lady was determined and understood that now was her only good chance. She understood that they could dance without music. The main thing was to feel the rhythm and gain confidence. The aristocrats wondered why Mevia's daughter was dancing with such a man, but perhaps it was the most beautiful dance of all at the ball. Gradually, the Duke began to feel more confident. He began to think less about how he looked from the outside. He was not used to the close attention, and the aristocrats were also wary of the cold gaze of the ruler of the north, which sent shivers down his spine. The Duke began to move with her, although at first it seemed more like a struggle with his own body. At that moment, he realized that dance had become more than just a physical movement for him, but an opportunity to be closer to Lady Mevia and share this unusual experience with her. Suddenly, the heroine realized that they were circling in a slow waltz, and the man who had never even entered high society had suddenly learned to dance. In fact, the Duke had never learned to dance, and now he was incredibly glad that his dancing did not look strange. His words sounded as if the young man was born with talent, and smiling, Mevia looked into his eyes. The Duke would never have thought that he would be able to learn to dance right here and now, but now their magnificent dance was being watched by delighted aristocrats. The young man even did much better than the lady had expected, and the dance turned out to be not at all difficult for him. While the young man was dancing, he realized one very important thing, and for him it was quite unusual. The girl was not only not afraid of him, she openly expressed sympathy towards the Duke, when all the people ran away in horror from his mere glance. Perhaps it was one of her tricks, but this dance made the Duke think for the first time. They continued to dance in a slow waltz, and the young man finally decided to ask a question. The Duke felt that the lady was probably up to something and decided to give in to her prank. After the ball, Lady Mevia returned to her chambers, where a hot bath filled with aromatic oils and rose petals awaited her. She closed her eyes, letting her thoughts drift away from the noisy hall, the sounds of music playing in her head, and images of dancing with the Duke of the North appearing before her eyes. The words that the Duke was ready to give in to the girl's prank still whirled through her head. She was not even embarrassed to ask if the young man really wanted to say that he was going to marry her. This meeting made a strong impression on the heroine, and the Duke promised to meet her next time. And to the questions about the wedding, he answered that they should postpone the conversation until later, at their next meeting. Maevia did not expect the Duke to answer exactly like that, since he himself had recently refused to correspond, and now he had suggested postponing the topic altogether. Looking into the girl's eyes, the young man asked her to wait a little until it was a more suitable time. After these words, he left without saying anything else, and the heroine remained standing in place, impressed by what had happened. That night, the girl couldn't sleep, and she couldn't believe that the Duke could just disappear like that. If he doesn't appear again, then judging by the novel, he will only be able to return in 10 years. Taking the soft toy in her hands and wrapping herself in a blanket, the heroine decided to get some sleep first and then think about this issue. The teddy bear lay next to her, and Maevia was going to sleep as long as possible today, having received a lot of emotions from meeting the Duke. She had a strange dream about how the maid was tirelessly wiping the floor, and the mistress asked her to wipe it harder. It was a dream where Maevia was the real villain, and she was yelling that if I didn't like something, there would definitely be fried potatoes for dinner. But for some reason Prince Gilbert was in the maid's costume, who asked that he not be given potatoes under any circumstances. And this dream was too strange. After such a stupid dream, the heroine felt sick, and her nausea was not at all due to alcohol. The maid even suggested that the lady go out later and brought wet wipes with her. The sun was just beginning to rise outside, and Maevia didn't understand why she should meet someone at such an early hour. As it turned out, Duke Kalakis was waiting for the heroine in the hall, and he arrived very early in the morning for a special meeting. Since the girl could not sleep half the night, in the morning she felt completely exhausted and was not ready to see anyone. Therefore, when she came out to the Duke, she suggested postponing the meeting if this visit was not so urgent. She did not understand why the young man was silent, he left yesterday, and why he returned in the morning, and she only felt very tired. Without even greeting him, the Duke uttered only one word, and that word was his name, Edis. He asked to call him that and to switch to informal familiarity, but the heroine admitted that her language can be harsh, and she usually speaks in a respectful manner. Then the Duke saw no other choice, since the heroine was not going to fulfill his request. He quietly snapped the fingers of his right hand, and the heroine eagerly awaited what might happen next. To her great surprise, a huge blue magic circle appeared above the girl's head, which appeared with a snap of the Duke's fingers. Frightened, the lady thought the Duke was going to get rid of his future wife, thereby revealing the contract. 2 sheets of paper with golden patterns suddenly appeared from the magic circle. Looking at the 2 documents, the heroine did not immediately believe her eyes, because it was he who was in front of her. The young man said that even if she wanted to sleep, she still needed to look at the details of the marriage. It was the marriage certificate from the contract with the ancestor with the imperial seal, and the lady wondered why the young man had such a gentle voice, and judging from the description of the novel, he should be lazy. She had the feeling that the Duke was not persuading a person, but a cat or a dog, and perhaps this was because he had supernatural powers. Looking at the certificate, the heroine said that next time the young man should warn her before disappearing. If he did that again, she was going to say some nasty things, but the Duke decided to just happily accommodate his wife's wishes. They sat opposite each other, and right now the fate of each of the heroes was being decided. Thinking ahead to the future, the young man admitted that he was going to divorce her soon, and Maevia should be ready for this. In response, Maevia smiled and said that she would only get a divorce if the young man turned her life into a living hell. There were many sham marriages in the empire that later turned out to be successful, and the Duke warned that he might have difficulty having children, and his body was a little different from that of an ordinary person. Fortunately, the heroine had no romantic illusions about 6 children, or she took into account the words of her future husband. The lady decided to find out about the Duke's age. He said that he once met the First Lord before he became the Grand Duke, and was a man wandering through dangerous places with a stupid but cute face. Therefore, the young man was very ancient, and he also admitted that he had never had children and still does not have any. This conversation was quite sincere, and now the heroine learned that the Duke did not even have a secret affair and had never had mistresses. But the young man asked to ask a question about how he was still alive, because didn't the lady understand that he had met the very First Lord? Maevia understood everything perfectly well, but now she was more interested in her personal life, and she wanted to ask about the secret of an incredibly long life later. If the young man ever wants to share the secret of his immortality, he can tell her about it. Now the lady was going to live in foreign lands, having with her only one maid whom she could trust. She could also encounter people who would hate her, but for some reason this thought did not frighten the lady at all. The Duke decided to find out about the conditions that the ladies were so desperately worried about, and depending on what it was, he was ready to agree to her proposal. Mevia had long since prepared an answer to this question, and stated that one bruise could cost the Duke 1,000,000 coins. Minor injuries cost 1,000,000 coins, burns will cost 50 million coins, and fractures or amputations may be completely beyond the Duke's means. Also, a clause about death was added to the marriage certificate, and the heroine laughed and asked if the young man was ready for this. She pointed to a point in the document, but the Duke's gaze began to become tense. The Duke sighed, and was surprised at the terrible opinion the heroine had of his lands, which she had never even visited. Perhaps her words sounded funny, and what great heroine could suffer while living in a grand duchy? The lady was not an ordinary duchess, and in the future she was going to take over a place that had remained vacant for too long, and perhaps someone might like the unplanned arrival of a new power. Mevia was one of those who prepared for all possible outcomes of a situation, and that was why she asked the Duke to think of it as insurance. But the Duke did not know that the real reason was a little different, and at least Mevia's words were only an excuse. Gilbert Kalakis was also heading north, and the heroine knew that when she arrived. Then she will arrive at the very time when Gilbert will be surrounded by a pack of his faithful dogs. Even if she was going to play by the rules, it didn't guarantee victory. The Duke suggested that if the girl was scared, she could take someone with her, and he was willing to allow every last soldier from the family's personal army to be taken. At first the girl seemed very brave to the Duke, but now she looked more like a frightened little rabbit. Placing the certificate on the table, the lady stated that the Duke could sign it first if he agreed to all the terms of the marriage. She deliberately got up from her chair and moved the document closer to the Duke, and at that moment she found herself very close to him. She noticed a rare shade of purple in the young man's eyes, and his eyes were like summer blooming cornflowers. The Duke's gaze reflected a sparkle like that of a shining violet star in the depths of a dark blue ocean. After these words, the heroine noticed that the young man became embarrassed and found his expression quite cute. Finally, the young man asked if the girl was definitely not afraid, and at that moment he was speaking specifically about himself, and not about the land or the wedding. The beautiful people did not frighten the heroine at all, and the young man asked if she really did not want to add any new conditions. He agreed with all its points and signed the marriage contract, and now it was Mevia's turn to pick up the pen and ink. The heroine signed the marriage contract anyway, and after her signature, the paper suddenly caught fire, and it looked like real magic. She knew about the document's subsequent combustion after signing, but she had never seen it in person, and this spectacle felt completely different. The heroine even joked that she was very interested in what the creators of the contract were like, but suddenly the Duke offered to show their graves, and the girl had to refuse the tempting offer. Eventually, the promises between the families were finally fulfilled, and Mevia was now the Grand Duchess of Kalakis. As Edis said, Mevia became a lady who now had a high status and title, but for some reason it seemed to her that she had not received the title of Grand Duchess, but rather that she had become part of the army of an attractive demon king. Mevia was thinking about the demon kingdom and immediately decided to find out when they were going to go to the estate. Before leaving, the lady had to say goodbye to her parents, and the Duke was ready to go at any time his wife wanted. The Duke was sure that there were definitely other people who would want to say goodbye to the lady, besides her parents. At this moment, Sarah came in and apologized, but a letter had arrived from Lady Elaine, and she thought she must inform her mistress of it at once. Perhaps it was because of that incident on the day of the ball, since Monica was more interested in Gilbert than the Grand Duke. She must be wondering now why Mevia hates Gilbert and calls him the most terrible person in the world. As expected, Monica was asking for forgiveness and wanted to deliver a birthday invitation, and Mevia did not consider the letter too urgent. But Sarah insisted that the lady might need to hurry, and the messenger warned her about this. Because Lady Monica had set out on a journey following the letter sent, and was now on her way to visit Mevia to talk about everything in person. If she was going to come anyway, Mevia couldn't understand why she had even asked about a convenient time to meet. The Duke said he knew a place where the heroine could hide, but she had no intention of going to the Grand Duke's estate. Mevia probably didn't want to run into the master's eldest son, and he promised to take care of it if that was the only reason. Mavia jokingly stated that if the Duke was going to take care of this, then this place would definitely not remain on Earth. For the first time in the conversation, the Duke of the North smiled and stated that the place did not matter at all, and the heroine can always ask him about this if she needs something so that no one can find her. Slowly getting up from the sofa, Mavia suggested continuing the conversation in the living room, since it looked like another guest would be arriving soon. The young man smiled and said, looking at the girl's cute nightgown, he was very interested in what her everyday clothes looked like. Mavia didn't immediately realize what was wrong with her clothes, but as soon as she looked in the mirror, she wished it was all just a bad dream. Until now, she had been wearing a nightgown all this time, so she immediately asked Sarah to help her get ready as quickly as possible. She was so noble, it seemed she could change the currents of air. If she became a great duchess, all the glaciers of the world would melt before the goddess of spring. After the ball, the prince's life changed incredibly, and everyone still laughed at the situation that had happened. People told each other how Lady Mavia had refused the gentleman when he proposed marriage to her. The ballroom was in complete chaos. Lady Mavia was dancing with his lordship, and no one could understand how such a beautiful flower could get involved with the Duke of the North. Everyone was sure that it would be better if she married the second master, the one who was more than a century older than her. The two young men discussed the matter, and one of them wondered if someone so fragile and innocent could bear a relationship with a duke. The prince felt angry all these days, and it seemed to him as if everyone around him had gone mad. As soon as the prince heard Mavia being called fragile and innocent, he found it so funny that he simply couldn't help but laugh. He asked the hero, he probably wasn't interested in who she really was, and the principal could tell everything about the new Grand Duchess in detail. But the young men seemed not to hear his words, and the prince was indignant were these people really ignoring him now. In any case, it was time for them to leave, because no one knew when his lordship would decide to return. They were going to hide Gilbert from the sight of his lordship and Mavia, and disguise him well. Before leaving, the prince said that he wanted to say goodbye to his friends, and this was a very important condition. The young man even laughed. Could the prince really have friends? And could someone seriously be friends with such a fool? Gilbert screamed, "How dare he talk to his master like that? And probably this young man is just blind and does not understand anything." But in response to this, the young man asked them to watch their language, because the master for them was not the prince at all, but the great Duke of the North. Gilbert needed to stop making a fuss, but the boy loudly declared that they probably hadn't come to their senses and that the disobedient dogs needed to be trained. And even if the young men were elite knights, Gilbert was sure that nothing terrible would happen if their blood was spilled right now. But if Gilbert's father found out about this, it would not be easy. The young man could not allow himself to be treated like this, and took out his sword to pay off his offenders. As soon as he took hold of the hilt of the sword, everyone around felt a terrible stench, and the knights laughed. Was it really this friend with whom the prince wanted to say goodbye? Gilbert felt disgusted, laughed at and looked down upon by the knights after his sword somehow ended up in the stinking mud. The knights laughed that something had to be done about this terrible smell, and called the prince's character also stupid. The young man guessed that the person Gilbert wanted to meet was Baron Cullen Turner, who was his best friend. One of the knights offered to deliver a message so that the prince would finally calm down, and given the situation, everyone doubted that the Baron would visit his friend. Gilbert angrily stated that the knight probably should have started with this, and there was no need to drag it out for so long. The knights left the room and locked the doors with an iron padlock so that the prince could not escape and free himself. The second knight asked if he was sure that it was necessary to go to the Baron, since the prince could create big problems for them again. The great Duke of the North was currently in the capital. Even if Gilbert dared to do something, he would soon pay with his life for his stupidity. The Baron was allowed to speak with the prince, and now he learned that the young man was going to return to the estate. He promised to remain silent because after the incident, His Grace the Grand Duke personally arrived in the capital. Now Gilbert needed his only friend to do something for him, and it was for this reason that he called the Baron to meet him. The young man said that if this was related to Lady Mavia, then the prince should forget about it, because he would value his life and did not want to get involved with the Duke. He'll probably feel a little better if he can get rid of that dark-haired maid who's always hanging around Mavia. The Baron pretended not to hear these words because Mavia was not the kind of person who would just sit idly by while her trusted people were touched. So after the prince's words, he was convinced that the young man could no longer think sensibly, and it was probably time for him to switch to the other side. But suddenly Gilbert started talking about a joint business in the north, and he heard that the Baron was unhappy with the distribution of profits. The man asked if the prince dared to threaten him in such a situation, and decided to raise the topic right now. The Baron had helped the prince more than once, and even knowing this, he did not take proper care of the young man, but now he offered to become more generous. And he said that he would gladly share part of the profit with his friend, and would in no way offend him if he were able to fulfill his request. Placing his hand on his friend's shoulder, the prince asked the Baron to do him one last favor, and declared that it was incredibly important to him. There was a misunderstanding in Margon's living room, and the heroine could not understand how she ended up in just a nightgown and spent the entire conversation with the Duke in it. Mavia felt awkward because she went out to Edis without even realizing what she was wearing because she was half asleep. She told the Duke that she had simply forgotten to change her clothes, and that was absolutely not something the Great Lord would think about. Mavia did not want the young man to misunderstand her, but in response the Duke only asked him to forget about the strange incident. The lady was finally brought a mug of hot drink, but no matter how much she looked at it, it did not look like what she ordered. For some reason the drink was rather strange, but the heroine clearly remembered that she had simply ordered an Americano. Mavia didn't want to find out anything, and decided to just drink a hot drink to finally perk up in the morning. From the girl's surprised face, the Duke realized that something had probably gone wrong and decided to ask about it. Suddenly he got up from the sofa and declared that the girl had been lying to him since the very first day of their marriage. To the lady's great surprise, the Duke went somewhere and asked Mavia to wait for him a little. For some reason, he went to the kitchen, where there were just a lot of products for making any tasty drink. Quietly opening the door, Mavia decided that she should definitely take a look, and saw the Duke standing in the kitchen. The heroine saw how the Duke took off his jacket and put on a kitchen apron instead, carefully tying it at his back. Then he took a knife and began to cut something with it, and during this time, he did not utter a single word. The aroma of coffee beans wafted throughout the kitchen, and the Duke carefully poured boiling water into the coffee pot to make delicious coffee. A few minutes later, he had created a culinary masterpiece and had a glass of strawberry latte in front of him. And now before the lady stood a dessert prepared by the Grand Duke of the North himself, who wished her a bon appetit. The dessert really did look very appetizing, and even Mavia had never seen such beauty before. The exquisitely decorated drink looked just like something from an expensive restaurant, and the Duke really hoped that it would suit the lady's taste. Touching the straw, the lady was about to try it, but she was worried that if it was not tasty, she would still have to pretend that she liked the Duke's drink. As soon as the lady took one small sip, she admired the incredible taste of the drink, and the Duke turned out to be even better than the imperial chefs at their estate. The young man said that if there was a city food that the girl really liked, she needed to be informed about it, and he would be able to prepare exquisite dishes for her. Everything that was happening was different from what the lady had imagined, and she thought that the Duke would still be too lazy to come here. She also assumed that the young man would delay signing the contract, and could it be that the lady had been reading the novel incorrectly all this time? During the ball, the Duke had certainly been very lazy, and she did not know what had made her find it necessary to change, but there was no need to remind him of this. With a happy face, the lady said that she would like a delicious caramel pudding covered with sweet syrup. After a delicious strawberry latte, Mavia and the Duke headed to the palace garden to spend some time outdoors. That friend who wanted to come in the morning would probably not visit Mavia anymore, and she was absolutely sure of it. For some reason, the Duke spoke as if he could see the future, but the young man admitted that he only heard better than others and could hear even the quietest sounds. This was because the Duke was a transcendental being and had quite a lot of abilities. Admiring the young man, Mavia admitted that he had a lot of abilities and that the Duke was probably simply underestimating himself. She couldn't understand why Gilbert was so stupid, because you could learn something just by watching your relative. At first, the Duke also tried to get closer to the young man, but he soon realized that the prince simply looked like his biological father. One day, a terrible incident occurred, and the Duke managed to see what Gilbert did to his mentor. The heroine could not remember anything in the novel about Gilbert's biological father, and could it really have been an unwanted adoption? It was described simply as Edis picking up two abandoned children in the desert in the original novel, and Mavia thinking the Duke was just being kind to them. But there is probably a reason why he refused, but unfortunately the young man could not tell all the details. She didn't understand why it was difficult for Edis to give up a person who wasn't his biological father, and whether he was really being threatened by his biological father. The Duke was a powerful ruler, and she couldn't believe that anyone could threaten this man, and there was certainly no one in the novel who was that powerful. If she had known that she would end up in this novel, she would have definitely read it to the end before her transformation. Now, for the first time, the lady thought about punishment. Now she became a great duchess who had enough power to carry out her plans. Suddenly, the Duke asked about the maid Sarah, and Maivia said that she was a close person and had been helping since childhood. But the young man's mood changed dramatically, and he only coldly replied that now everything was clear to him. Noticing the gentleman's wary look, Maivia asked if something could have happened to Sarah, and she was completely unaware of it. It seemed to be Gilbert's doing, and the Duke was aware that the maid had been attacked. The Duke had the ability to see what was happening and admitted that Sarah was now fine and did not look injured. Surprisingly, the maid turned out to be very accommodating and only did what her mistress ordered her to do. After the kidnapping, Sarah begged to be released, and she absolutely did not want to end up in a dungeon with her hands tied. But the people who were tasked with kidnapping the maid made a big mistake and brought her to the completely wrong person. The maid promised to tell everything the kidnappers wanted to know about her mistress, if only they would let her go, and the kidnapper was surprised that she was really ready to betray her mistress. Sarah began to complain about the small salary and stated that she was just a hired maid. The kidnappers didn't even have to bother, and the main one asked Sarah to quickly tell about her mistress. In fact, she was closer to her than anyone else, and the maid really knew everything about her. It would not be an exaggeration to say that she knows the mistress's most secret mysteries, as well as her mortal weakness. Sarah said that the lady had her weaknesses, and she couldn't whistle at all. Falconry was a required skill for an aristocrat, and so Maivia was embarrassed that she had not yet learned to perform such an important action. Since Maivia could not whistle, she could not train the falcon bird, which was extremely necessary for her as a girl of high title. The robber laughed, and he did not expect to hear that the lady's weakness would be so stupid. He considered it a useless weakness, and the maid had one last chance to tell him something truly important. Sarah said that the lady sleeps very soundly in the morning, and therefore they can attack her because she will not even notice anything. Maivia also hates sweet potatoes, cucumbers, onions, and tomatoes, and the robbers may plan to poison her by avoiding these foods. After listening to the maid's words, the robber grabbed his head and considered her words to be real madness, because the crazy mistress had an equally crazy maid. The robbers were tired of listening to the maid's nonsense, and they assumed that killing her would be the best decision, since there were no witnesses around anyway. But suddenly the Duke appeared in front of the robbers, waved his hand and created a magical whirlwind, ordering Baron Cullen to finally stop. The Baron managed to feel a strong blow from a fist on his face, and from surprise he completely lost concentration. He couldn't understand what had happened, but suddenly he saw the real Duke of the North in front of him, and next to him was a lady with pink hair and a sweet smile. The caring lady removed the bag from Sarah's maid's head and apologized for arriving so late. She understood that Sarah was very scared, and the lady really wanted to get home together as soon as possible. Now Maivia knew that Baron Cullen had made the gravest mistake, and the rope he was trying to hold on to turned out to be a rotten life preserver. The two kidnappers decided to escape as quickly as possible, so as not to incur the wrath of the Duke of the North, who was known for his cruel character. The Duke allowed the kidnappers to escape for only one reason: he knew exactly who ordered the kidnapping. And if the lady needs these people, the Duke warned that she can simply say so and he will do everything necessary to punish them. With special respect in his eyes, Edis asked Maivia to tell him everything in detail and promised that if it was in his power, he would do everything to sort it out. Unexpectedly, Maivia asked the Duke to prepare a room for the newlyweds, because that night she was going to come to the residence of the Grand Duke. At last, the maid was safe, and now she and her mistress got into the carriage to return to their native estate as soon as possible. Sarah was not usually so quiet. She had no injuries, but this incident would still remain a trauma for the maid. Therefore, the lady promised to make sure that today's incident would be counted as a work injury for which Sarah would have to be paid. Just a second ago, Sarah looked upset, and Mavia was probably just worrying for no reason. The maid was kidnapped while she was packing her mistress's things, so she was unable to finish the job she had started. But given the circumstances, she had no other choice. But for revealing weaknesses, the lady joked that she would cut Sarah's salary for 3 months. That evening, Mavia met with her mother to talk about some important matters. Mother wondered if Mavia had come to talk about Sarah's abduction, and that must be the reason. Since the Mavia family was quite famous, there was nothing that happened in the capital that they would not know about. Mother knew that her daughter was going to go north, and Mavia told her that she was moving to the Grand Duke's residence that evening, right after dinner. Since her daughter had already made her decision, her mother could not stop her. She also could not stop worrying about her, and Mavia probably had reasons that she could not tell her parents, and the heroine sadly understood that she had no time left at all. After all, the catastrophe that will soon happen in the north can only be prevented in this way. Soon after that evening, Mavia's parents stood outside the gate of the mansion, watching their daughter leave for the distant north. It was incredibly painful for the mother to watch her daughter actually leave. Because she was so young, she was very worried whether everything would be okay with her. Holding an envelope in her hands, a maid suddenly approached Mother and said that the lady asked her to give the letter when she left. And it seemed that Mavia understood that her parents would worry, which is why she left a farewell message. After her daughter left, the mother decided to read the letter, which was addressed to her dear mom and dad. In it, she asked that after leaving for the north, he exert some influence on Baron Cullen's business for her sake, and that was her only request. Mavia wanted the man to go bankrupt and work in the mines, and she was sure the Baron deserved to lose all his savings. The daughter promised to invite her parents to the north every season, and asked her mother and father not to be too sad after her departure, but now they decided to trust their son-in-law. They were sure that Mavia was safe. Still, he is the one their daughter chose, and they will only be glad if Mavia is happy with her new husband, even in the far north. The carriage, together with the maid, headed along the forest paths to the estate, and it was already slowly beginning to get dark outside. Looking out the window, Mavia saw majestic mountains, and she had never seen such a place in the capital. The north was difficult to reach, and Sarah began to worry that her mistress would be given rock-hard black bread or forced to clean in icy water. Laughing, Mavia said that it definitely wouldn't happen, but she was prepared not to expect a warm welcome for the unplanned Grand Duchess. And if something like that happens, Mavia will immediately understand if Sarah loses her composure even a little. Finally, the heroines arrived at the residence of the Grand Duke, which was located in the capital in the heart of the cold north. The Duke certainly had a grand residence, and as soon as Mavia arrived at the palace, she was amazed at its incredible size. But Lady Mavia did not even expect such a reception, and as soon as she got out of the carriage, she was immediately very surprised. Because in front of her stood columns of respected knights, and their commander met her. They loudly expressed their respect to Her Grace the Grand Duchess, and this was the first time that this had happened to Mavia. And the temporary manager of the residence named Vega appeared before the lady, and he expressed his respect to the arriving ladies. Mavia smiled, for it pleased her to see so many people respecting her, for she now held a high title. Suddenly, a knight emerged from the crowd, probably wanting to look at the Grand Duchess. He stated that he had become a knight this year, and since the steward was often busy, he promised that he would be able to accompany the great lady. Sarah even wondered if the lady had sent them a gift in advance, but the lady did nothing at all. The punishment was not long in coming. The knight stepped out of line. They were outraged that they did not even manage to congratulate the lady who had officially arrived. But the knight seemed to have been waiting for this all day, and he didn't care at all that he had just been punished in front of the Grand Duchess. A wonderful surprise had been prepared for the lady, which she definitely could not refuse, and this place with the best sunlight, moonlight, and morning dew was on the 3rd floor. Also, a special luxurious bed with gold-carved inserts was prepared for the Grand Duchess, lying down on which one could feel as if one were on a soft cloud. Probably they prepared the best for the girl, and the young knight could not contain his emotions. Since he had already managed to tell the lady about the soft and cozy bed, after that the knight realized that his surprise had just failed. The Duke of the North, Edis, was immersed in a hot bath filled with aromatic oils, but thoughts about the upcoming event did not leave him, because Lady Mavia, his future wife, appeared in his palace. he ordered the knights to prepare the perfect meeting and only thought about whether the young lady, who was probably already fast asleep in her nightgown, liked everything. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter in his life, a chapter with Lady Mevia, and he was determined to do everything he could to make this chapter a truly happy one for both of them. After a hot bath, Edis decided to head to his room and was sure that by this time Mevia should already be asleep. Duke Edis quietly opened the door, trying not to make a sound. The late night had enveloped the castle in silence, but when he entered the room, his heart sank. Edis stood for a moment on the threshold, not believing his eyes, and he was sure that he had mixed up the rooms. Lady Mevia sat on the bed, her fair hair falling softly over her shoulders, and in the dim light of the fire, her face looked especially gentle and attractive. Seeing the lady, the young man hastened to apologize, and was sure that he had clearly mixed up the room, but Mevia asked the young man to stop, because he definitely had not mixed up the rooms. More logically, the marriage room that the lady requested should not have been separate. Smiling, the lady asked the young man not to run away under any circumstances, because they could just go to bed and hold hands sweetly. It was the first night the heroes spent together, and lying on opposite sides of the bed, Mevia thought that holding hands wasn't too difficult, but the Duke remained cold to her remarks. They were already bound by a marriage contract, and Mevia wanted them to become a little closer to each other, admitting that the Duke could ask anything that interested him. He could ask anything he wanted, and Mevia was happy to answer any question he might have. She confirmed that she was ready to tell the whole truth that interested the Duke on their first night spent together. The Duke asked how the girl had managed to defeat Gilbert that time, since such a level of skill would have been too difficult for an ordinary person. Mevia did not intend to hide it, and told that in fact she had drunk the blood of the devil back then, and it was she who had given her magical powers. The heroine had made a contract and received the blood of the devil, fairly and honestly, with due conditions. The Duke had not expected his wife to be involved with the devil, but Mevia assured him it was just a simple deal. In exchange for guarding the devil's grave, she received demonic blood, and the heroine was sure that she was just lucky then. I doubt that she will be able to use it next time. The devil that Mevia made a contract with looked like an ordinary person, and he himself proposed to make a deal. Mevia asked Edis to bend his ear, and after she whispered something to him, the young man even suggested that he had probably heard his wife wrong. The girl also had questions that she wanted to know the answers to, which is why she whispered them in the gentleman's ear. She wanted to know what Edis's measurements were and who he considered his ideal in terms of appearance. For Mevia, these were the usual questions that would definitely be asked on the wedding night, but after her words, the young man became noticeably sad, and not intending to answer such questions, he said that it was probably time for Mevia to go to bed. The heroine never managed to get close to Edis on their wedding night, and the Duke of the North still remained cold towards her. Lady Mevia awoke in the Duchy of the North, and the first morning in her new home filled her heart with excitement and anticipation. The maid Sarah was carefully combing her mistress's hair, and Mevia noticed that the girl's hands were shaking very badly, and she herself was completely confused. The lady even offered her help, because she understood that it was probably difficult for the maid in the new place. Sarah was more scared than usual, and perhaps it was because they were in a confined space. It was like comparing a lion in a cage with a free lion. Edis felt the urge to take care of Mevia and make this morning special, so he asked the maid to give him his comb. Edis walked up to the lady and began to carefully comb her hair, doing it slowly and carefully, trying not to cause her discomfort. Lady Mevia enjoyed the first moment of intimacy. When he finished styling her hair, she looked at him with gratitude. She felt that ever since they got married, the Duke considered her his lady, and the heroine was even interested in how far he would agree to go if she asked him. Perhaps the Duke should choose clothes in a different color, and due to his fair skin, any shade would suit him, a formal brown or blue suit to match his eyes. Mevia imagined that if the boy was a pink bow tie, it would accentuate the color of her hair, and such an elegant suit would also be interesting. So the heroine hurried to find out why the Duke always wore only black, but for him, choosing other colors was simply tiresome. The young man was also sure that other colors did not suit him at all, and that was why his wardrobe consisted exclusively of black suits. The young knight, who wanted to attract the attention of the new duchess, stood in the kitchen from early morning and prepared something special. He wanted to surprise the girl by preparing a dish that the Grand Duchess would definitely like. The young man was carried away by his occupation, but suddenly behind him he heard a female voice calling him by name. Lady Manhwa entered the kitchen and decided to find out why the knight decided to cook something, since this duty belongs to the cooks. The young knight did not expect at all that the Grand Duchess might be in the kitchen right now, and he was very surprised by her behavior. Most of the servants in the Grand Duke's residence could not stand to see the young master, so he simply kicked some out, and sometimes knights replaced other servants. It turned out that the temporary butler to whom the Duchess bowed yesterday was a former commander of the knights. Since this was the case, Manhwa realized that she could now calmly entrust the knight with tasks, and unexpectedly she asked to fry the meat so that the smell would soak into her clothes, and this request was too strange for the Grand Duchess. A sunny morning enveloped the residence of the Duke of the North in soft golden light, filling the spacious halls and picturesque gardens with the warmth and joy of a new day. Sir Vega saw the Duchess walking down the corridor and reported that the young gentleman was now in a separate pavilion, away from the main building. It was a luxurious place, no worse than the Duchess's new bedroom, and everyone was sure that if they locked the young man up here, he would repent, but Manhwa was sure that with such an approach, it would be impossible to deal with him. She went into the room to greet Gilbert, and the young man did not expect to see here the lady who had poured wine on him in front of everyone at the ball. Gilbert instantly became furious as soon as he saw Manhwa and asked what she was doing in his room. Manhwa smiled and replied that from now on she was his real mother, and probably the young man should not cross all boundaries. She warned that they were going north on the weekend, and from that moment on, as a foster mother, she decided to take care of Gilbert, and this was a new game for Manhwa, who would come and had already thought out every step. The lady placed a tray with a special dish on the table, but the young man angrily threw the tray away, from which porcelain plates flew onto the floor. Hearing the noise, Commander Vega immediately burst into the room to check if everything was okay with the lady. There was freshly prepared food lying on the floor, which the young knight had diligently prepared for the lady, but she ended up taking this dish to Gilbert. As soon as the young man entered the room, he immediately realized that the young master was to blame for everything. He started shouting at Gilbert that he had gone too far because the Duchess was carrying a heavy tray to treat him to breakfast, and he certainly shouldn't have done that. The Duchess reported that she suddenly felt dizzy and that the tray must have been too heavy. She looked at Gilbert's twisted face, who knew she was about to give him a worse surprise. Manhwa had been thinking for a long time about how to punish the wicked Gilbert, and Sarah asked the lady if she really wanted to do it. The maid was noticeably nervous and was talking about the matter with young Mr. Gilbert, with whom the Duchess probably wanted to get even. Sarah knew her mistress very well and was sure that she was definitely going to do something now. Manhwa was of the opinion that there are people in this world who understand everything in a good way. But there are others who will only obey for a little while after you show them who is boss, and she asked Sarah which category Gilbert fell into. The boy belonged to the second category, but Sarah was not worried about this at all, because Manhwa could not be sure that the demon's potion did not have side effects. The heroine opened the box, which contained vials of demon blood, and it was probably time to try the demonic blood. The maid was incredibly worried about her mistress because no one knew what result the demon's blood would bring. Manhwa knew that if she took the monster's blood repeatedly, there would be no way to avoid the side effects, and she had been thinking about it for a long time. But now she wanted Gilbert to understand everything properly so that he would know whom he had dared to touch one day. That evening, in the semi-darkness of her room, Lady Manhwa carefully drank the demon's blood from a glass vial. She immediately felt how the dark force penetrated her body, filling her insides with energy and mysterious possibilities. Dressed in a maid's costume, she entered the Duke's room and asked Edis to get out of bed as quickly as possible. Manhwa said that they needed to finish one important task quickly before the medicine wore off. Late in the evening, the Baron dealt with the people who kidnapped the maid and wanted to punish them for not being able to carry out the order properly. The kidnappers' faces were bruised from beatings, and the Baron shouted that these people were completely stupid and could not be entrusted with anything. He shouted that the kidnappers had dared to escape from their master, and the Duke and his mistress were watching all this from the high roof. Looking at this, Mavia realized that she was indeed a good boss, and the Duke probably thought the same. Silence fell over the heroes, and the young man did not answer, and Mavia could not understand why Edis did not answer. He offered his hand to the girl and said that they needed to go down to finally complete an important task. A magical blue whirlwind appeared near the girl, and the Duke, looking into her eyes, asked her to be extremely careful. Mavia promised to return soon, and the Duke eagerly awaited her return. A magical blue whirlwind lowered the lady from the high roof to the ground, and appearing right in front of the Baron, Mavia greeted him with a grin. Not expecting to see a young lady, the Baron screamed in fright and asked what the Duchess was doing there. He had seen Lady Mavia before, when she had tried to deal with Mr. Gilbert and also when she had saved her maid Sarah from the kidnappers. The boy stated that he was simply following Gilbert's instructions if Mavia had come because of a recent incident and decided to deal with it. While Mavia smiled sarcastically, the Baron assured that in any case, he would not have caused any harm to either the maid or her. Grabbing the man by the jacket, Mavia laughed, suggesting that rumors that the man had been beaten by a maid would be too humiliating in high society. The Baron did not expect that the lady would be so strong that he would not even be able to remove her fragile feminine hand from himself. She took a step forward and punched him in the face with such force that the Baron flew back and fell to the floor, stunned. The dark force inside her gave her confidence and courage. She was ready to fight for her maid and for justice. A huge bump appeared on the Baron's face from the girl's blow, and two kidnappers watched all this. Frightened by the fragile lady, the young men watched everything that was happening, declaring that they saw absolutely nothing. But Mavia wanted word of the Baron's beating to spread as quickly as possible, and she asked the kidnappers to watch their boss being beaten by a weak servant. It is not without reason that the heroine is dressed as a maid, and the rumor that the Baron was beaten by an ordinary maid could be very unpleasant for him in high society. At the most opportune moment, the Duke appeared from the magical whirlwind, who wanted to know whether the lady had dealt with her offenders. It all ended much faster than she thought, but the Baron was punished for his terrible crimes. And Edis said that it was time for the Duchess to go, because they had something interesting left that she would definitely like. The knights had no choice but to take the Baron by the arms and go with him to the palace to provide medical assistance. As if from nowhere, the young man's voice came and asked why the Baron did not follow his instructions. The Baron called Gilbert a real scoundrel because it was because of him that an ordinary servant beat him up. Gilbert stood before him and wanted to know why the Baron did not follow his instructions, but the man only rudely replied that the young man should not dare to order him around anymore. The Baron was sure that Gilbert was actually to blame himself. All he did was run after a woman who would never agree to be with him. These words probably offended young Gilbert's honor, and he hated it when someone told him what to do. Lady Mavia saw everything that was happening and laughed that apparently her son had gone out while the Duke and she were not in the palace. Suddenly, the Duke announced that the girl had better return home, but she did not understand what had just happened and why there was such urgency. Edis only offered to walk Mavia to the mansion and asked that she go to bed first. But the Duke was determined to finish the job himself and promised Mavia to return a little later in the evening. The Duke wanted to deal man-to-man with Gilbert and the Baron, who dared to dishonor the honor of his future wife. A few days later, Gilbert finally emerged from his room, his face covered in bruises and scratches that he likely received from his adoptive father. Something had been going on in the main building since early morning, and Gilbert looked out the window and noticed that it was incredibly noisy there today. As it turned out, the ducal couple were planning to visit the Marquis's mansion, and one of the knights reported this to him. Her Highness the Duchess also asked me to be sure to convey something to the young master. The knight held a tray with a fragrant dinner in his hands, but as soon as Gilbert saw it, he immediately shouted at him to throw the food away immediately, and the mere mention of Mavia made Gilbert incredibly angry. In the soft light of the morning sun, Lady Mavia prepared for her visit, her hair neatly braided into an elegant plait, into which were pinned small blue flowers that sparkled in the light like dewdrops on the morning grass. Edis did an incredible hairstyle, and as soon as Mavia admired his efforts, the young man declared that he was probably just lucky this time. Every element of her look was carefully thought out, from the light dress made of the finest silk to the exquisite jewelry that emphasized her beauty. The hairstyle turned out very cute, and Mavia couldn't even believe that it was a young man who braided her incredibly beautiful hair. Emotions raged inside her, excitement and hope intertwined with determination. She was ready for the meeting and for what she could bring into this world. The Duke of the North, Edis, and the Duchess, Maevia, arrived at the Marquise's estate with a little excitement in their hearts. This was their first official visit to the lady's parents. Maevia's parents were already expecting their daughter with the venerable Duke of the North, and the atmosphere was filled with warmth and anticipation. Everything had already been prepared for their arrival, so Mother invited the guests to go straight to the table and try the exquisite dish. Looking at her parents, Maevia suspected something was wrong because their behavior was a little constrained. Probably, Mother and Father were simply very worried before meeting the great Duke of the North, about whom there were many terrible rumors. The Duke of the North, Edis, sat at a large table in the hall of the Marquise's estate, surrounded by Lady Maevia's parents, and despite the exquisite dishes, he remained silent, only occasionally raising his gaze. His reserve and isolation created a tense atmosphere, and soon an awkward silence reigned at the table. The Duke was not particularly talkative, but what surprised Maevia most was that his parents were also silent, and it seemed they still felt awkward about Edis. She didn't want this important evening to be remembered exactly like this, without live communication and warmth. Suddenly the Duke turned to Maevia and said that it was necessary to eat a lot in order to live long, and handed her a fork with a piece of potato. When the maid Sarah told the kidnappers that the mistress did not like potatoes, cucumbers, and onions, the Duke stood next to her. And he knew perfectly well that Maevia did not like these products, and now he specifically wanted to put a piece of cucumber on her plate. Maevia smiled and said that if she had to try to put those foods on her plate, she would immediately file for divorce. The father asked the Duke if they were really planning to leave for the far north this weekend. Thanks to Edis speaking first, the parents finally brought up the topic that interested them. Mother reported that Monica was still looking for a meeting with Maevia, and it would probably be worth meeting with her before leaving. Maevia was sure that since her mother herself raised this topic, it meant that Monica had really been looking for her and had come more than once. She asked her daughter to be friendly with this lady, because it seemed she loved her very much, but Maevia never felt support and warmth from this person. Last time she complained to Gilbert behind her back, then Gilbert made a big scandal and they didn't even have time to talk. The heroine thought that perhaps history could still go differently, which is why she decided to meet Lady Monica one last time. After an exquisite dinner filled with pleasant conversations, Lady Maevia's parents came out to escort their guests to the exit of the estate. The Marquis took a step towards the Duke and said that his daughter was the light of their lives, and he only wanted the Duke to take care of the girl and treat her with care. The Marquis admitted that they had been worried before when they heard rumors about the ruler of the North, but now he had seen with his own eyes that rumors did not convey what kind of person he really was. Maevia's father really hoped that the Duke would always protect his daughter and take care of her, as he does now. As they went their separate ways, Duke Edis felt determined to fulfill his promise. The Duke said that he had even met the first head of the family, which meant that he had lived at least 500 years, but only now did Maevia wonder why the young man was still not married. So the heroine asked if the Duke really had the same character, attentive and kind, as he had been from the very beginning. But Edis was sure that Lady Maevia was simply the only one who thought so highly of him. Probably the others did not know the Duke well, and hardly anyone knew what his character really was. And looking at the heroine's carefully styled hair, one can already understand a lot about the person who ended up next to her. It was hard for Sarah to take care of her mistress's luxurious hair, but the Duke managed to make a beautiful hairstyle, and such a result could not be achieved in a couple of attempts. Therefore, the hero decided to ask what the young Duchess particularly liked in order to take her wishes into account in the future. What Maevia liked most this evening was seeing her so bright, but she knew very well that she couldn't always remain so cheerful. But Maevia really wanted the Duke to smile more often with all his heart, and promised to try to be there to give him joy. The next day, the carriage with the Duke and Duchess calmly headed towards the cold, distant north. The Duke kept a close eye on Maevia's condition, and as they rode, he asked the lady to open her mouth wider. No one knew what side effects might come from the blood of the magical beast that Maevia had recently drunk. Time asked Edis not to worry, because Sarah had carefully checked the lady's condition last night and also closely monitored the condition of her throat. The carriage passed through endless fields surrounded by majestic mountains. Since the Duke knew how to use teleportation, Mavia asked if he was going to use it to get to the north. The carriage with Edis and the Duchess slowly stopped. Lady Mavia, getting out of the carriage, stopped for a moment to enjoy the beauty of the landscape. Her eyes sparkled with delight when she saw the sun's rays playing on the surface of the water and the green trees bending towards the river, wanting to touch its transparent waters. When Edis was traveling to the capital, they passed this way, and he remembered this view well. It was rare to see such beauty in the northern lands, and he wanted Mavia to see the surrounding landscapes in person. In the novel, Esmeralda Calacas's crescent moon always remained impenetrable, and the only expression he sometimes allowed himself conveyed only contempt or discontent. But now, Edis wasn't cold from the beginning. He just lost his smile because of someone, and probably someone treated him cruelly. When the novel's heroine, Maevia, arrived in the north alone after her wedding with Gilbert, a huge, terrible fire was raging there. The reason was that the main character of the novel, Rehan, ran away from home and accidentally removed the seal into a powerful monster. After this, Rehan completely changed due to guilt and was never the same good boy again. The carriage of the Duke of the North slowly approached the borders of his native lands, where the snowy landscapes greeted him with warmth and nostalgia. In the village, the locals lived an ordinary life, going about their daily business and enjoying communicating with each other. Children were happily making snowballs and playing outside in the village, enjoying the soft and fluffy snow. Arriving at the village, Maevia felt relieved, because judging by the fact that the village was in order, they made it on time. Mevia decided to approach the Duke with one important question that had just popped into her head. She called the young man by name, but the Duke, looking out the window, looked very mysterious. Duke Edis was sitting in his carriage, lost in thought, when his gaze slid out the window. Doubts arose in his heart as to whether she could love these lands as much as he did. Beyond the glass lay the snowy north, covered in a blanket of white snow that sparkled in the sun like millions of crystals. He wondered if it was right to bring his wife to this harsh place where cold and eternal winter reigned. He turned to Maevia, who was sitting next to him, and saw her face full of anticipation and curiosity. Looking out of the window, the lady said she had never seen such a terrible building, speaking of the residence of the Grand Duke, and it seemed to her as if a monster octopus had appeared and doused the whole castle with water. With these thoughts in mind, the Duke decided to do everything possible to make Lady Mavia feel at home even in this harsh land. He couldn't promise that things would be better inside the castle, and he had no idea how to comfort his future wife now. Mavia knew the future was coming. She was glad that they returned before the north was completely burned to the ground. Lady Mavia stepped out of the carriage and the cold air instantly embraced her. The harsh northern lands were completely different from the warm regions where she had spent most of her life. However, when she took a step forward and looked at the Duke's residence, something unusual caught her attention. She took a deep breath, feeling the freshness of the winter morning, but at the same time her heart was filled with a slight anxiety. In front of the majestic gates stood a multitude of cats, fluffy and graceful creatures that wandered peacefully through the snow. Looking at the Duke, the heroine decided to ask if the second young gentleman really loved cats so much, but Edis replied that he would not keep such a clumsy creature even if they were given to him. Near the Duke's residence, a young gentleman was already awaiting their arrival, who greeted his father upon his return. In front of them stood a boy with blonde hair, who was eagerly awaiting the day when he could finally meet the Grand Duchess. It was a boy named Rehan, who had many faults, but he tried hard and asked the Duchess to be lenient with him. The heroine remembered very well what kind of character Rehan had in the novel, and now she could not understand why she was found behaving this way. The Rehan she knew during this period was a restless and extremely energetic child. The boy looked very cute, and Mavia even thought that he was probably just pretending. In a gentle voice, she replied that she was very pleased to meet the young gentleman, who looked at her with great respect. Leaning towards the boy, Mavia said that she was counting on his support and would try to understand his behavior. Suddenly, the boy was called out by a hero, whose voice was incredibly familiar to him because this young man was also part of the Duke's family. His older brother had just called him, and Gilbert had also come with everyone to the cold north. Suddenly, Gilbert declared to the young gentleman that the Grand Duchess was an enemy of their family. And she should never be trusted either. But Mavia had never expected to hear such harsh words from Gilbert. Edis noticed that the young man had absolutely no sense of humor and that he still lacked education, despite the fact that he had already received a fitting punishment for his actions. Mevia couldn't understand where Gilbert got the courage to act like that in front of Duke Edis. Rayhan was surprised that his elder brother had just expressed such a rude opinion about the Grand Duchess. Mavia smiled and asked the young master not to worry, because if she really was an enemy, she definitely wouldn't have come to the duchy. The heroine did not expect at all that Gilbert would dare to say such a thing in front of his younger brother and the great Duke of the North. Edis wondered if Mavia was the lady that little children were afraid of. Even in her past life, the children avoided the heroine, and her original goal was to spend the money she had saved from investments and throw crazy parties on the corpse of Prince Gilbert, or help Rayhan grow up without psychological trauma so that the young man can finally find peace in his soul. After arriving, sitting in a hot bath, Mavia thought that if this continued, she would never be able to make friends with children his age. Mavia asked Sarah if she had forgotten the gift for the young master that they had agreed on earlier. The Duchess wanted to give the gift during dinner to please young Rayhan. Laughing, Sarah asked if the hostess was really going to give the gift in such a form. Mevia was sure that the gift would definitely please the young master, despite her appearance. The wooden table, decorated with exquisite services, was set for dinner. Duke Edis and young Rayhan were eagerly awaiting the appearance of the new Duchess. The boy was surprised that his father was going to have lunch with him today, since before the Duke usually ate in complete solitude. Edis asked the butler not to add onions to one soup, and Rayhan asked if his father had stopped liking to eat soup with onions. Duke Edis felt joy at seeing everyone gathered together at one table. This was a new stage in his life, full of hope for the future in the duchy. Rayhan was still just a boy, but a spark of curiosity and delight already shone in his eyes. The boy asked if his older brother would join the dinner, but the Duke was sure that Gilbert knew the value of his life, so he was unlikely to come. And Lady Mavia is not at all one of those people who would forgive Gilbert for his rude actions. Rayhan was surprised that the Grand Duchess was much stronger than her brother, who was known as a genius in fencing. The boy became excited because he realized that the Duchess really was a great woman. At that moment, the door opened, and Lady Mavia, the new Duchess, entered the dining room, her outfit elegant, and she radiated warmth and kindness. Seeing her, Rayhan stood up from his seat and looked at the lady with curiosity and admiration, wanting to please the Duchess. Approaching the boy, Mavia placed the box in front of him and said that as an apology she would like to present the gentleman with a gift that he could open right now. Rayhan was very worried because this gift was from the Duchess herself, and the boy had not received any gifts for a long time. The box looked very sinister, and Rayhan opened it immediately with great curiosity to find out what kind of gift was inside. As soon as the boy opened the box, his eyes filled with tears, and he immediately thought that the Duchess did not like him or that he had made some mistake. Seeing tears welling up in Rayhan's eyes, Edis asked if something had happened to the gift. In the box, on a velvet cushion, lay a huge dark blue gemstone, and it was probably a precious diamond. It was not just a diamond, but a rare gemstone, which was a very expensive gift, but the boy did not know about it at all. Seeing the gift, the Duke asked how long it had been since Mavia had last communicated with the children, and indeed it had been some time. Mavia asked to trust her taste because she values the black diamond in itself as a precious thing, and in the future it will definitely be useful to the young master. She even wrote a letter by hand and put it inside, and just wanted Rayhan to know that the Duchess wanted to get closer to him. The boy sat there in bewilderment, hoping that he would not bring a curse upon himself if he touched the frightening black diamond. After presenting the gift, Edis offered to taste the exquisite dishes that all the chefs of the duchy had worked hard to prepare. All this time the boy looked at the box, wondering where the Duchess had found such an ominous thing. Rayhan was scared, and perhaps what he had heard earlier now turned out to be the real terrifying truth. The boy decided to find out the truth from his older brother, so he wanted to ask Gilbert some questions. He asked excitedly what the young man meant by saying that the Duchess was their worst enemy. Gilbert asked if the boy really doubted his words, since he had clearly made it clear that Mavia was a bad person. At that moment, one of the knights approached and asked Gilbert not to put unnecessary doubts into the younger gentleman's head. He stated that all talk about the Duchess being an enemy of the family was complete nonsense, although her grace was not particularly kind or gentle. But the young man knew that even the proudest aristocrats of the capital recognized her as the most outstanding beauty. And in addition to her attractive appearance, she has enormous wealth and an honorable family line of a marquis. These were just rumors, but the young man was sure that they proved exactly how special the Duchess was. Rayhan thought that Mavia was probably the ruler of the shadow quarters of the capital, who could destroy even Prince Gilbert himself at any moment. That's why she can so easily get her hands on sinister things that even the prince himself can't get his hands on. All these thoughts made the young gentleman's stomach ache badly, and he asked to leave dinner early. From the very beginning, Mavia noticed that the young gentleman was not feeling well and offered to accompany him to his room. She asked the butler to bring something for the young master's stomach to the bedroom, and to ask the nanny if Rayhan had any chronic illnesses. Mavia also asked to change the blanket to a warmer one, and looking at the boy, the Duke said that the lady was doing everything with the purest intentions. Mavia asked the young gentleman to come with her, and she promised to take good care of the gift. After Gilbert's words, Rayhan saw Mavia in a completely different light, and he was unable to discern her pure intentions towards the young master at all. Entering the young master's bedroom, Mavia politely asked if she could stay there. On the sofa in the room sat a cat with incredibly white fur named Isabel, whom Rayhan asked to go to her room. Mavia stroked the snow-white cat carefully, and at that moment Rayhan became very scared because Isabel usually scratched people's hands. But to his great surprise, the cat gently pressed herself against the girl and even began to purr. The duchy's cats even had their own maid to look after them, and their names were invented by Count Elliot. Each cat was given an elaborate name, and each had its own designated room. Rayhan asked if the Duchess was tired, since she could go back to her room, and he promised to just lie quietly in his bed. But Mavia wanted to stay with the young master for a little while, and did not consider it a difficult task at all. In fact, Mavia had very little understanding of children and never had the opportunity to get close to them. Perhaps she couldn't be of much use to her master now, but she really wanted to just stay with him at least until the nanny arrived. Mavia asked thoughtfully if her presence would disturb Rayhan, who was probably not yet accustomed to the presence of the Duchess. Looking at the lady with huge eyes, the boy admitted that her presence would not bother him at all. He just felt like he was bothering Mavia too much, and that was exactly how Rayhan felt right now. She walked over to the bed where the boy was comfortably nestled under a warm blanket and tenderly covered him up to his chin. Rayhan looked so defenseless and calm that Mavia's heart filled with warmth. The young gentleman decided to ask how Mavia met his father, since the Duke rarely leaves the house. They first met at the Imperial Palace, and Mavia told him that the Duke had come to punish a man who was going to harm her. Mavia understood perfectly well that she was communicating with a child, so she decided to tell everything in general terms. The boy asked if his father would come tomorrow, and Mavia promised to definitely organize a meeting, but for this, the young gentleman needed to recover. Rayhan said that he felt just fine and was already planning to choose an outfit for the upcoming meal. At that moment, the nanny entered the room, but Mavia wanted to read the boy a story, promising to do so next time. Mavia felt warmth in her soul from these simple words. She knew that their connection was just beginning and that many moments of joy and discovery awaited them together. "Let's go to the room," the maid asked the young gentleman if he was feeling unwell and needed to take medicine, but Rayhan smiled and replied that everything was fine and the problem had already been solved. For him, the Duchess was a truly amazing person, because everyone either worships their father or fears him, but she treated him completely differently, probably because the Duchess was so strong that she could crush even Prince Gilbert and ruled the shadow world of the capital. The gift Mavia gave him looked sinister, but the care she showed was genuine, and for the first time, Rayhan felt such a pleasant feeling. He was still afraid to communicate with Mavia, but the boy firmly decided that she was not worth avoiding at all. Mavia walked down the hallway, noticing that the outside of the castle didn't look too well maintained, but the inside was in better condition than expected. In the Mavia Duchy, she saw many statues of cats, and it seemed like there were more cats than people. They say there are people who furnish their houses entirely in their own way, and here even the towels had cats embroidered on them. Maivia became incredibly curious about what the Duke's room looked like, and she would have been very surprised if there were pictures of cats everywhere there too. Entering his office, she saw that there was no decoration with cats in this room. It was gloomy, but overall quite decent. Looking around the room, she suddenly saw a sofa on which the Grand Duke himself was sitting. The young man smiled and asked if the inspection was over, and after dinner he waited for the Duchess to appear. While Maevia was looking around the room, the Duke asked if he had passed her exam, and Maevia admitted that the young man had succeeded. It was their first meeting after a week of separation, and sitting down on the sofa next to the Duke, the lady asked if he hadn't missed her. It was just a joke, but Maevia heard silence in response, and she even wondered if Edis had any problems. Previously, the young man said that due to the peculiarities of his body, it would be difficult for him to have children in the future. And Maevia wanted to know if this would be completely impossible, because this question interested her greatly. The Duke chuckled and replied that the lady had a way of speaking in ambiguous phrases, and if she wanted to know something, she could ask about it directly. The young man would never have thought that he would say such a thing in his life, but now he asked Maevia to look into her eyes and not at the level of his trousers. The lady herself did not know why she was looking intently at the gentleman's trousers, and she hid her curiosity very poorly. Apparently, the heroine was too tired for the day, so she decided to go to bed first. As Maevia lay down in her cozy bed, she yawned and realized that she was very tired and instantly fell asleep. And Edis, standing like this in front of her, looked like a real villain, incredibly beautiful, like the Lord of Darkness. Edis might be thought to be the Lord of Darkness, but it is unlikely that anyone would try to destroy him, because Edis will not allow anyone to defeat him. But for Maevia, the young man was damn handsome, but also lazy, and this was his flaw, which she could do nothing about, deciding to simply take care of him. Waking up, Maevia saw thick snow outside the window, but for the north it was a mere trifle, and today Count Elliot, I wish to express my respect, decided to pay a visit. The Duke said that he was not lazy at all, but one could not accept care without giving something in return, and Maevia was surprised that she had said those words out loud yesterday. The news of Count Elliot's arrival has arrived, and the heroine will finally meet the man who has turned the Grand Duchy into a complete cat's nest. In her opinion, a man should look like a huge cat lover, because it was not for nothing that so many animals lived in the duchy. Count Elliot entered the drawing room and politely greeted the Duchess as well as the venerable Duke, who was sitting next to her. Elliot was responsible for managing the lands and was a loyal servant of the House of Kalakis, ready to lay down his life for this great family. The young man looked completely different from what the heroine had imagined, with tanned, shiny skin, as if he was not working on the estate, but relaxing at a resort. However, to begin with, Maevia decided to simply say hello and keep all her assumptions to herself for now. She was interested in how things were with land management, and whether there were those who took advantage of the owner's absence, illegally enriching themselves at the expense of the treasury. Things were going more or less smoothly. There were greedy people who crossed the line, but the young man admitted that he eliminates such people without hesitation. The Duke asked if Elliot didn't look like a man who would kill even his own parents, and that he was usually used to deciding such issues himself. In this regard, the Count suggested that further reports on management matters could be submitted directly to the Duchess's desk, since Edis had not even looked at his detailed reports before. Maevia admitted that she would hope for assistance in the future, and the young man promised to provide an official report after the traditional ceremonies were completed. Smiling, Maevia asked to take all the cats from the castle because she had heard how much the Count adored them. Elliot called the cats his fairies, and he was sure that they were a part of his soul, and there was no need to drive them away. The young man served his Duke well, and Edis promised him this salary next month. Maevia asked if the duchy would go without the cats, having heard that the young man called them fairies. Kneeling down, Elliot asked to leave all the cats in the duchy and promised to do anything. The Duke noticed that, judging by the expression on the young man's face, he was still not himself, and he could not let him go just like that. Elliot was incredibly afraid of his master, and Maevia asked him to look into what she had said and report back. Taking pity on the young man, she asked Edis to let the master go, and this was her sincere desire. As he left the door, Elliot promised to take up the task assigned to him from tomorrow onwards, and thanked the Duchess for such a pleasant conversation. His behavior seemed unexpectedly stubborn to Mevia, and Edis didn't seem to mind, and judging by the documents, Elliot had a lot of work to do. She remembered the nameless assistant of Edis, who sometimes appeared in the plot of the novel and was close to the Duke. In this conversation, Mevia clearly made it clear that she was not to be trifled with, and now the gentleman would definitely behave more carefully. Edis apologized and thought that the lady should have explained in advance the Duchess had not been in the Kalakis house for a long time, and he had completely forgotten about the important ceremony. There was talk of a ceremony. On the night when the moon would disappear, it was necessary to climb the first tower, and after these words, Maevia covered the Duke's mouth with her hands. Maevia decided to clarify the details with the second young gentleman and asked to bring him here for a minute. Maevia had the right to do as she pleased, and the Duke only agreed with her wishes so that the lady would be comfortable in the duchy. Young Mr. Rayhan sat opposite the Duchess, who asked the boy for help. They say that there is a traditional ceremony to be done in the first tower, and Maevia told Rayhan that he knows absolutely nothing about it, and she would feel more at ease if the young gentleman gave her some advice, and that is why she decided to talk to him. Rayhan said that they say that a spirit lives in that tower, and legends say that it was sealed by the first great duke. Usually the spirits that live in nature are very calm, but the spirits that live in the north are supposedly able to harm people, so the Grand Duke sealed them in stone statues and imprisoned them in the tower. The spirits are supposed to bless the lineage, and their seal was placed so that it could only be removed after 1,000 years, so the Duchess holds a ceremony asking for the spirit's blessing. The nanny did not tell the young master why the Duchess should ask for a blessing, but he heard something about the blood of the family. Maevia assumed that it was probably best for her not to get into the details, and it was probably related to the Kalakis blood. She thanked the young gentleman for the explanation, saying that she had done the right thing and approached him in particular. Rayhan was incredibly happy that he was able to help the Grand Duchess, but he still felt awkward around her. Mavia was about to have tea with Edis soon and asked if the young master would like to join them. The boy happily agreed, and the lady promised to wait for him outside while he changed. Rayhan was a sincere and bright child, and only Maevia knew that in a month he would change dramatically, and now she needed to create happy memories, but she should not awaken the magical gift under any circumstances. As a foster mother, the heroine had to win the young master's trust, protect him from Gilbert's violence, and show Edis's face more often. Maybe if he did everything right, he would remain pure and innocent like he was now, and Maevia really wanted that. Just as she was thinking this, Rayhan appeared, looking stunning, his gold jewelry glittering, his hair expertly styled, and one look was enough to understand the depth of his feelings for the Duke. He was genuinely enjoying the tea party and finally showed his childish spontaneity, and even the look with which he looked lost its former wariness. After tea, the head butler took Rayhan to his next lesson, and the boy was incredibly happy to spend time with the Duchess and his father. Edis asked if her master had told her the story of the mysterious spirits that inhabited the high tower. The spirits sealed by the first Duke unwittingly served the house, bringing blessings, and they could take revenge on the descendants of the one who imprisoned them. The weather outside was not the best, and it was snowing heavily, but since Maevia had taken on an important task, she wanted to finish it as quickly as possible and invited the Duke to go outside with her and keep her company. Edis happily agreed, because Maevia always accompanied him on every outing, and he was extremely grateful to her for that. The lady offered to view the property later and also asked if the Duke would join her. Accompanying the lady was not at all difficult for him, but the young man was curious about what role she had assigned to him. Bodyguard, patron, or personal barber, for Maevia the master played many roles. Long ago, magical beasts were called demons, because any contract sealed with their blood invariably led to human death. The devil who came to Maevia was different. Even if the agreement was broken, he did not demand life, but only fleeting torment. Of course, the curse of the ban was already on him, but if Maevia found out about it, she wouldn't care at all. And even if she were left alone with the devil, her heart would not waver even once. The Duke invited the lady to return to her chambers, as he had some business which he needed to attend to as soon as possible. In this strange land, Edis was the only one she could rely on, and the heroine did not understand why he was asking her to leave. There were beautiful blue flowers on the table, and Maevia asked what the name of the blue-white flower was that looked incredibly like the cold Duke. Edis did not understand why she chose him, refusing even the crown prince, who broke off the engagement for her sake. He had no idea what was hidden behind that beautiful appearance and sweet charm. Edis decided that he would go to the very end until he understood the true reason, just so long as he didn't meet him on this path. The heroes stepped out onto the snowy street, and Mavia immediately felt a strong cold that penetrated to the bones. Heavy snow had blanketed the duchy, and Mavia suggested that perhaps she had chosen a bad day, suggesting that they postpone it and go for a walk when it was warmer. It was only a 5-minute walk to the first tower, and the Duke asked Mavia not to give up too early, despite the intense cold. The lady was shivering from the cold and even asked the Duke to use teleportation, and it turns out that it was very warm in the castle. And now she didn't want to experience the magnificence of temperature spells in this way. The tower was indeed too close, but the Duke was already near it, and Mavia was indignant that he dared to abandon her in such terrible weather. Finding herself in the far north, Mavia understood what real cold and truly severe frosts are. By the time Mavia managed to reach the tower, we were stuck in huge snowdrifts, and her feet were also very cold. As she reached the gate, she called Edison a real traitor. Shivering from the cold and slowly becoming covered in snow, she joked that the marriage contract should have included a clause about frostbite, not burns, because she had almost turned into a frozen icicle. Edis looked at his wife with a smile, and he found her sweet behavior very funny. He extended his hand and cast a spell. Light sparkled in the air, and a fireball, a magical source of heat, appeared in his palm. A bright fire burned inside the ball, radiating light and warmth, and the Duchess looked at the fireball in surprise. Mavia carefully took the ball in her hands. A warm light enveloped her palms, and she felt the cold go away. She looked at Edis with gratitude. The heroes entered a tower, which was rumored to be inhabited by ancient sinister spirits. Mavia wanted to know if they found the statue where the spirit was sealed. Could they make a personal wish in front of it? The Duke had no intention of forbidding the Duchess anything, for after all it was only an ancient superstition. So far, Mavia couldn't figure out how to make a wish if she didn't even know where the spirit was sealed, and there were a lot of statues in the tower. The Duke wondered if Rayhan hadn't said that only one most ancient spirit was imprisoned in the tower. He invited Mavia to check for herself whether it was true or not, and his grin screamed without words that he was absolutely right. Perhaps this could disrupt the spirit's life form. And now Mavia understood why the previous heads of families did not even approach them, because of what their predecessors had done, they now cowardly send only duchesses here. Mavia was sure that she couldn't return earlier, and she wanted to quickly make a wish and go back to the duchy. She tried to think positively, and now it was clear that she wouldn't have to whisper dreams to an empty statue. Having looked around, the heroine decided to choose any statue and make a wish in order to return back as soon as possible. Suddenly, she noticed a statue on the floor, which looked like someone had thrown it there on purpose to break it, and just a little more and it would have crumbled to pieces. The Duke said that if the statue were completely destroyed, the spirit inside it would most likely disappear forever. The eyes of the statue lying on the floor seemed to be alive, and Mavia felt that she had to choose this particular statue. She finally decided to make a wish near one of the statues, and even took something with her as a gesture of goodwill. She asked the Duke to support the magical warm ball, and she was going to make her deepest wish. With her hands folded in front of her, Mavia began to speak and asked the Lord of the Spirit, sealed in such a remote place, for a great blessing. Hearing the Duchess's words, Edis couldn't help but laugh, because her speech sounded like a lecture. Mavia prayed to the Lord Spirit that his statue would last for many more centuries, and told of her simple wish to become a little richer. She wanted all the gold and diamonds of the empire to belong to her, as well as power, glory to the ends of the continent, and she promised to take care of the well-being of the statue if the spirit fulfilled her wish. And if during the repair something irreversible accidentally happens, she asked the spirit not to worry and promised to keep it forever in her heart for the century. Mavia promised the spirit that he had become special to her and decided to inquire about the deal. If Mavia was going to take a risk, she was going to do it big, because she was sure it was just superstition anyway. The Duke inquired about the prosperity of her house, and Mavia said that the side branches were already sharpening their knives. These people, who said to simply sign a marriage contract, declared that the head of the family must necessarily be a man. But now that Mavia was in the north, everyone openly demanded that a new heir be chosen, but her parents were only amused by this. The heroine did not expect that the conversation would go in such a boring direction, and suggested that the Duke go back. Eddis stood today with an impassive face, as if he had not heard the words of Mavia, who was standing right in front of him. She wondered if the Duke wanted to see anything else, and she was sure that he, too, wanted to leave as soon as possible. Whenever he spoke of ancient spirits, the Duke's face became even more serious than usual, and he had probably been fighting spirits for several hundred years. But no matter what expression the gentleman had on his face, Mavia still found him impressive and incredibly charming. Maevia couldn't take her eyes off the Duke of the North, captivated by his confident posture and the depth of his eyes, which reflected strength and wisdom. They descended the dark, gloomy, winding staircase of the huge tower after the Duchess asked the spirit for a blessing. Suddenly she thought she heard something, and the Duke even thought that Mavia wanted to stay here a little longer. She asked Eddis not to pay attention because she must have just heard something. But they were not alone in the dark tower, and the sinister, dark entity dreamed of returning its powers, waiting for the time for people to pay for imprisoning a magical spirit in an ordinary statue.